Lord of Mysteries, Chaos Path by author Yu Shang Wu Wang Chuan. Chapter 176-200. Chapter 176, Luo Lin's Crisis. Bethel glanced at Amon, naturally hearing the provocation in his words. He generously nodded and said, "He does support me." This was the plain truth. Whether it was Roland or Klein, when they discussed the topic of Lord of the Mysteries with him, their attitude was very simple. If Mr. Door could become the Lord of the Mysteries, no one would compete with him, they would all be very supportive. If he couldn't, then Klein would take the position. Bethel could also tell that Klein was genuinely uninterested in the position of Lord of the Mysteries, even wishing he would rise up and become the Lord of the Mysteries, even though they all knew that in the original fate trajectory, the Lord of the Mysteries was Klein. As for Roland, he didn't care who among them became the Lord of the Mysteries in the future, as long as it wasn't Amon. It must be said that this attitude made Bethel feel both amused and genuinely relaxed. He liked Roland and Klein and didn't want to fall out with them over the matter of the Lord of the Mysteries. Unlike Klein, Bethel harbored a desire for the position of Lord of the Mysteries, even though he clearly understood what he would face after becoming one. Amon evidently hadn't expected such an answer. He, isekai'd, glanced at Bethel, and then suddenly smiled, saying, "You truly are the hope of the masses." These words contained both emotion and, rarely, a touch of sincerity. For Amon, if Bethel became the Lord of the Mysteries in the future, he truly wouldn't be too surprised. His old guy had been the closest person to the Lord of the Mysteries back in the fourth epoch, even more competitive than Amon himself. This competitiveness not only referred to sequence but also to support from others. If it weren't for Bethel's accidental contamination by an outer deity later on, he would have been the most likely person to become the Lord of the Mysteries. If Amon's current journey to the outside world meant being universally reviled, then Mr. Door in his normal state, venturing outside, would likely even receive support from that old guy of night to become the Lord of the Mysteries. Bethel looked at him, his expression devoid of pride, simply saying, "If you weren't like this, you would have been more capable than me. Amon, perhaps you really should try to acquire humanity." Amon paused, lowered his eyes, and said nothing more. "Humanity, huh? Jack, you'll host the next mini-game." Roland, wearing the Lucifer persona, didn't care what Amon was thinking. He looked at Jack Jones and instructed, "Always assigning tasks to me, old guy, you have no martial ethics." Jack Jones shook his head, then pulled out a small notebook from somewhere and said, "The first game is an animal version of Pictionary. Everyone participating will temporarily turn into small animals. The rules are simple, 2 people per team. I will give a word, and one of the 2 players can see the word directly but cannot tell the other person directly, they can only express it through drawings. If the other person can guess the correct word, they get 1 point. Jack Jones briefly introduced the game rules, then looked at everyone and said, "The team with the most points will receive a reward. They can make a request to my teacher that does not violate his principles and wishes, and is within his capabilities. Participants will also receive a consolation prize." At these words, the angels, who had not been particularly interested in the game, all paused. They naturally didn't care about the consolation prize, but the first place reward was quite tempting. Many people present had wishes that required Lucifer's power to achieve, such as Ask, who wanted to reunite with his children, or Amon, who urgently wanted to see his biological father. Jack Jones continued to smile, saying, "Those who want to participate can come to me to register." Everyone exchanged glances. Klein was the first to raise his hand and say, "Jack, count me in." Although the probability of winning with so many powerful figures present was low, adhering to the principle is "since I'm already here," Klein felt he should still participate. What if he won? While meeting his family once a month could alleviate Klein's longing, who would complain about having more such opportunities? "I'll participate too." Ask revealed a gentle smile. "Tisk." Medici clicked his tongue, thinking of Saussure. He pressed his tongue against his teeth, and still said, "This great lord will grudgingly give you face and participate in your childish little game." He was all about his body turning to ash but his mouth remaining stubborn. "Such an interesting matter, I naturally cannot miss it." Amon raised his hand and pinched his monocle. "Want to play?" Ouroboros slowly raised his hand. The others looked at each other, and apart from Renette Tinacle, Marich, Pales, and Bethel, they also chose to participate. Then Bethel, you're in charge of supervision, to prevent cheating, right? Jack Jones looked at Bethel and suggested. Certainly. Bethel nodded with a smile. Amon, however, glanced at Jack Jones. He didn't see anything special about this little fellow, but he could tell that the other party's identity seemed somewhat unusual, so he smiled and said, "You are." But before he could finish, he was interrupted by Jack Jones, who smiled at him and said, "I am Lucifer's student. You can call me Jack." Lucifer. Amon only then noticed this title. He looked up at Lucifer beside him, guessing that this might be the false identity the other party was currently using. As for the other party's true identity, the name Luo Lin Saloya flashed through Amon's mind, then was crossed out. After all, Amon knew very well that Luo Lin Saloya was merely a young member of the Zoroaster family he had devoured, and the monster before him was less Luo Lin Saloya, and more a monster that had descended upon Luo Lin Saloya. However, Amon thought of something, glanced at Lucifer beside him, and smiled. "So you're called Lucifer now, huh? I thought your name was." Amon paused there deliberately. "What's my name?" Lucifer looked up at him, smiling unhurriedly. "You can say that name, I don't mind." However, he chuckled, not finishing what he was going to say. The name that was already on Amon's lips was choked back under these circumstances. He could tell that Roland truly didn't care if he spoke the name, Luo Lin Saloya, but even if he didn't care, the other party would definitely retaliate against him. If it were in the past, Amon truly wouldn't have cared much about being retaliated against, but now he was facing Roland, who, in a sense, held his lifeline. Chapter 177 Azek's Abstract Painting. Amon couldn't predict what the other party would do after he uttered that name. If it meant mutual destruction, that would be fine, but this matter clearly wouldn't have too deep an impact on the other party. So, after hesitating for a second, Amon smiled and said, "It's nothing. Since you've already discarded that name, there's naturally no need for me to mention it again." However, Amon continued with a smile, "I've kept this secret for you, so you must give me a reward, right? Since mutual destruction was impossible, it was better to simply leverage this for some benefits." What a cunning child. Roland, wearing the Lucifer persona, raised an eyebrow and suddenly smiled, saying, "Do you know your father's fate?" What? Amon was stunned. He naturally understood that this wasn't referring to the sun god's demise, but rather some kind of future. Roland raised his hand and patted Amon's shoulder, snapping his fingers to use the power of the alternate space to block out others. He looked at Amon and said, "He will completely perish, no matter which one, and almost lose the possibility of resurrection." Amon's hand, gripping his monocle, suddenly tightened. "But I can change this outcome. I can also try to truly bring your father back to life. Do you want such a future?" Roland smiled as he looked at him. Amon looked up at him and said, "I don't believe you." "You don't need to believe me, you just need to be a good child." Roland smiled as he looked at him, speaking unhurriedly, "Don't make me angry, and I'll give you the candy you want." Amon met his gaze, staring into those golden eyes that were similar to his father's yet completely different, and suddenly said, "I think I understand why Bethel and the others were seduced by you. You are terrifying." "Not at all, I'm clearly just a kind candy merchant." Roland smiled as he looked at him, still unhurried, and said, "I sell candy, and you pay the price. Isn't that fair?" Perhaps. Amon gave Roland a deep look, then smiled and said, "But I always have to see the goods in advance. Perhaps you haven't forgotten that you promised to let me meet my father." "Of course, but not today." Roland smiled as he looked at him, saying, "You will see your father in 3 days. I hope you don't cry like a child then." After saying this, Roland lifted the shield, his demeanor still calm and collected, but he let out a sigh of relief inwardly. That was close, he almost blew his cover. Roland had indeed overlooked the fact that Amon also knew the name, Luo Lin Saloya. Now that he thought about it, he regretted it. It wasn't that he regretted bringing Amon into the Leziran Club, but mainly that he regretted using the identity of Luo Lin Saloya directly when he first contacted Pales. He should have invented a new name. Roland lamented his oversight in his heart. As for the words he said to Amon, he wasn't trying to deceive him. Roland truly had the idea of resurrecting the ancient sun god in this era. This wasn't because of Amon, but an idea he had long ago. After all, if the ancient sun god wasn't resurrected, many things would be inconvenient to do. Although Roland also admitted that the ancient sun god's resurrection might bring some disadvantages, overall, as long as he didn't destroy the world, the benefits would outweigh the drawbacks. As for how to resurrect, he didn't know. After all, Roland only had this idea and planned to try it later when he had a clear direction, with no guarantee of success. But I didn't say it would definitely succeed, I said it was an attempt. Roland muttered in his heart, not at all anxious about the matter. After all, even if he really wanted to try to resurrect the ancient sun god in the future, it would have to be after he had sufficient strength. It was still too early now. Roland focused on two things at once, controlling the Jack Jones persona to host the you draw, I guess mini-game. Since it was an animal version, the participants naturally appeared in animal forms. Some, like Amon and Medici, transformed themselves, while others, like Klein and Leonard, who couldn't transform themselves, were helped by Renette Tinacle, whom Jack Jones had asked for assistance. So, at the start of the game, there were only a few people left in the alternate space. The rest were all small animals: Klein Kitty, Leonard the White Rabbit, Sharon the Ragdoll Cat, and Mr. A the Beagle. This was the mid-sequence group. Ask the Black Panther, Little Crow Amon, Ouroboros the White Snake, Medici the Lion. This was the high-sequence group. Since the total number of participants was an even number, with 4 mid-sequences and 4 high sequences, Jack Jones, adhering to the principle of fairness and impartiality, simply used a pairing of 1 mid-sequence and 1 high sequence, thus forming 4 groups. Group 1, Father and Son, Klein and Ask. Group 2, Arch-Enemies, Leonard and Amon. Group 3, Beautiful Dummies, Sharon and Ouroboros. Group 4, Brainless and Grumpy, Mr. A and Medici. Whether it was intentional or not, no one knew, but the scene was certainly entertaining. Jack Jones's smile was joyful, the atmosphere between Klein and Ask was warm. Leonard's face turned green, looking like he was about to faint, and Pales was by his side providing psychological counseling. Amon, not one to shy away from trouble, occasionally gave Leonard a strange smile, because he was a crow now. The atmosphere between Sharon and Ouroboros, however, was quite harmonious. The two quietly looked at each other, and it took a long time for them to squeeze out a sentence. No mistakes, one poem, one thought, one content, one by one. Hello. Hello to you too. The final combination of Medici and Mr. A had an indescribable feeling. Medici clearly found Mr. A, the brainless beautiful madman, quite annoying, while Mr. A seemed quite content to nest there. Thus, the game began in this peculiar atmosphere. Adhering to the principle of saving time, the games for all 4 groups naturally proceeded simultaneously, with the high sequences responsible for drawing and the mid-sequences responsible for guessing. Roland, while hosting the game as the Jack Jones persona, also watched the excitement from the side. On Group 1's side, the first word was Rosal. Ask, in his Black Panther form, dipped his tail in paint and began to draw on the white paper. In a moment, he drew a stick figure with a crown on its head, surrounded by many books and some strange lines. Ah, Klein Kitty looked at the somewhat abstract stick figure and tentatively asked, Emperor. Everyone had 3 chances to answer, so Klein didn't mind trying. Ask the Black Panther shook his head, as direct speech was against the game rules. Not the Emperor. But he's clearly wearing a crown, isn't that a crown? Klein fell into thought. After hesitating for a while, a thought suddenly flashed in his mind. Wait, could it be a specific person? A name suddenly appeared in Klein's mind. Since he still had 2 chances, he didn't hesitate to say, Rosal. Chapter 178 Knowledge passes through Leonard's brain. Correct answer. Team 1 gets a point. Jack Jones clapped like a seal beside them. This greatly encouraged Klein and Ask. In the following questions, even though Ask's drawings were still abstract, Klein managed to guess many correctly due to their mutual understanding. However, in contrast to Team 1, who had a good understanding despite abstract drawings, Team 2 was a disaster. The first word for Team 2 was tutor. Little Crow Amon, upon seeing the name, flapped his wings, dipped them in ink, and sketched a few lines on the white paper. Perhaps because he spent a lot of time with Fate Angel Ouroboros when he was young, Amon's drawing skills were surprisingly good. The face he sketched captured the essence of Alice the Tutor. But here came the crucial problem. While Leonard might seem like a protagonist with an old man in his head, appearing to know many secrets, he was actually a genuine slacker. He had no idea what Tutor looked like and, looking at Amon's drawing, couldn't guess who it was. Regrettably, time's up. Team 2 gets no points, Jack Jones said with a smile. And this was just the beginning. In the next few questions, Rabbit Leonard proved with facts that knowledge simply slid smoothly through his brain. After missing another question, Little Crow Amon finally couldn't help but raise his wing to touch the white circle on his face, looking gloomily at Pales and saying, "Pales, is this how you teach your student?" It was clear that losing to an illiterate person made Amon quite resentful. Pales chuckled upon hearing this and said, "He can't be considered my student." Little Crow Amon glanced at Pales, then turned to Jack Jones and protested, "I protest. This is unfair. All the questions you gave our team were beyond a certain person's scope of knowledge. Under these circumstances, it's impossible for us to score any points. This is a rigged game." Protest denied. Moreover, the questions I gave are theoretically all knowledge points Leonard knows. As for why he doesn't know, I'm not sure. Perhaps your way of expressing yourself is problematic, Jack Jones said with a smile. This was the honest truth. Although a bit borderline, theoretically, Leonard should indeed know all this knowledge, for example, Tutor in the first question. While he certainly wouldn't recognize the Blood Emperor, Leonard should still recognize the Tutor family crest. So Amon's gaze towards Leonard became even more like looking at an idiot. The atmosphere in Team 3 was much more harmonious. Perhaps considering that Ouroboros could draw, the first word they received was not a person's name. Open black lens bracket Aurora Order close black lens bracket. Ouroboros looked at the word and pondered for about half a second, then dipped the tip of his snake tail in ink and drew a man hanging upside down on a cross. True creator? Sharon asked tentatively. Ouroboros quietly shook his head. Aurora Order. Sharon continued to guess. Correct answer. Team 3 gets a point. Jack Jones announced promptly. In the subsequent questions, thanks to Ouroboros' superb drawing skills and Sharon's decent knowledge base, the two scored many points consecutively, forming a stark contrast with the other teams. The last team, Team 4, also known as the brainless and grumpy team, received their first word, open black lens bracket numinous episcopate close black lens bracket. It wasn't too difficult a question, but not simple either. Lion Medici let out a soft, HMPH, upon seeing the question, then dipped his paw in paint and scratched on the white paper. Jack Jones watched silently beside him. After a while, a question mark slowly rose above his head. Because as the one who set the questions, he also couldn't quite understand what Medici was drawing, only seeing a pile of smudged lines. If Jack Jones couldn't understand, Mr. A naturally understood even less. Thus, Team 4 naturally didn't score any points on the first question. Jack Jones then posed a profound question, what are you drawing? A skeleton, can't you tell? Medici, who hadn't scored, looked slightly displeased. I really can't tell. Jack Jones shook his head very honestly, then raised his hand to pat Medici's shoulder and said, Little Red, if you ever lose your job, don't ever become a painter. I'm afraid you'll starve. Lion Medici's expression immediately soured further. With such a naturally abstract painter and Mr. A not being too bright, Team 4's score naturally followed in the footsteps of Team 2. When a round of the game ended, Jack Jones tallied everyone's scores before addressing the little animals in front of him. In the "you draw, I guess" mini-game just now, Team 1 scored 7 points, Team 2 0 points, Team 3 9 points, and Team 4 1 point. Let's congratulate Team 3 on their victory. Immediately, everyone looked at the lazy white snake Ouroboros and the ragdoll cat Sharon beside him. Among them, Little Crow Amon and Lion Medici's expressions were particularly ugly, as these two not only yearned for victory but also got a 0 and a pitiful 1 point this time. Ah, me. Ouroboros blinked. Having only participated in the game to join the fun, he clearly hadn't expected to be the final winner. After several seconds, he said, so I can make a request. Not a single mistake, one head, one hair, one content, one by one. Strictly speaking, both of you can each make a request, provided it doesn't go against my principles and wishes, and is within my capabilities, Roland, wearing the Lucifer persona, said with a smile, in a very good mood. After all, watching a group of people turn into little animals and play games was truly a very interesting experience, greatly satisfying Roland's mischievous side. So he didn't mind paying for this fun. Anyway, with the conditions set, Roland wasn't afraid of the people making requests asking for too much, and he believed these people had a sense of proportion. Ouroboros showed a thoughtful expression upon hearing this. Sharon, however, was a bit surprised, probably not expecting to receive a reward herself. She then subconsciously looked at Renette Tinacle, likely seeking her advice. No need, consider me, this is your opportunity. The four heads held in Renette Tinacle's hand spoke in turn. Sharon pursed her lips upon hearing this, seeming to have made some decision. She looked at Lucifer and said, I hope to receive your assistance when I advance to demigod later. Not too much, just one favor will do. Although she had an angel teacher, Renette Tinacle was currently in a special state and mostly stayed in the spirit world, making it inconvenient for her to come to Backland. Therefore, Sharon and Marich still had to rely on themselves in Backland. Under these circumstances, it would naturally be somewhat difficult for Sharon to advance to demigod. If she could receive help from Lucifer, it would save a lot of trouble. As for saving this request for later, Sharon was not a greedy person. She knew deeply that greed would invite disaster. Chapter 179 Can the Lord Come Back? All right, Roland glanced at Sharon, nodded, and agreed to her request. For him, it was just a small favor. Ouroboros had finally come to a conclusion and looked at Lucifer, saying, I want those photos. Huh. Roland paused for a moment, then realized, and said with a slight smile, you mean the photos I took of you guys, of Amon? Ouroboros nodded, admitting frankly, and those photos you took of us when we turned into little animals just now, I want to keep them as a souvenir. Little Crow Amon's face instantly darkened, and he looked at Ouroboros with a hint of displeasure, speaking in a low voice, Ouroboros, have you been with the true creator for too long and finally lost your mind? Medici, who had been a bit annoyed because his embarrassing history was recorded, now laughed, embodying the principle that a smile never disappears, it only transfers. Although both were embarrassing histories, Little Crow was clearly more humiliated than him. The rabbit, Leonard, was no longer afraid at this point. He just looked like he wished he could dig out a 3-bedroom, 1 living room space on the spot. After all, he performed the worst in the game just now, fully demonstrating what it means to be illiterate. Cat Klein and Black Panther Ask were slightly uncomfortable, but Klein had extensive experience as a cat, and Ask had the experience of a death console, so although they were embarrassed, they managed to maintain their composure. Mr. A, on the other hand, seemed not to have heard these words, still huddled in a corner, lost in thought. Perhaps the countdown in the game just now made him quite disappointed, or perhaps he felt he had dragged down the Lord's angel. Mr. A still didn't know that Medici had already switched sides. Ouroboros looked at Amon in confusion, thought for a moment, and said, my mind is not problematic. After a pause, Ouroboros added, the Lord is not problematic either. Little Crow Amon's gaze at Ouroboros was practically screaming, you've finally lost your mind. Click. Just then, the camera flash went off again, faithfully recording this scene. Roland pressed the shutter continuously, taking many photos, before putting down the camera, curving his lips into a smile, and saying to Ouroboros, all right, after these photos are developed, I'll keep a copy for you. Thank you. Ouroboros thanked him sincerely. The you draw, I guess, mini-game concluded successfully here, because a certain Crow classmate repeatedly claimed the game was rigged and unfair, making comments like, it's cheating for Ouroboros, who can draw, to participate in this game. So, Roland very decisively banned the certain Crow. Afterward, Roland organized 2 more minigames, but he no longer used requests as a prize. He only used the results of the previous you draw, I guess, game as a taunt, successfully igniting the competitive spirit of some people, making the latter 2 games much livelier. When the concluding game ended, Roland, with the help of the true creator and Mr. Door, sent everyone home, and the first gathering of the Loafers Club came to a successful end. Quiet church. After returning to his familiar room, Leonard still hadn't fully recovered, and thinking back on his recent experience, he felt as if he had been dreaming. So Pale saw a certain red glove suddenly raise his hand and pinch him, and immediately asked in confusion, what are you doing? I suspect I'm dreaming, Leonard said earnestly. Pales. The next second, the kindly smiling old man raised his hand and harshly twisted a certain red glove's face. Do you still suspect you're dreaming now? Hiss, that hurts. Leonard first cried out, then covered his face and repeatedly shook his head, saying, No, no, I'm awake, I'm very awake now. Hee. Pales glanced at him and chuckled twice. Leonard, while rubbing his face, looked at Pales, who was no longer a shadow but in human form, and asked with a hint of curiosity, Old man, can you come out now? I could always come out, it's just that I was too weak before to create a clone, Pales said with a chuckle, feeling quite good about this matter. In any case, being able to beat up Amon's main body and recover to sequence 2 level was a great thing for Pales. Oh, Leonard didn't pay much attention to this matter, only asked curiously, then why did you suddenly create a clone? Pales glanced at him, then suddenly chuckled and said, to tutor you. Ah. Leonard immediately looked bewildered. Pales then looked at him and said, now everyone knows you're an idiot. Although you're not my student, you are my parasitic object. In the eyes of others, we are one. If you're too foolish, it will affect my reputation. Although it's a bit late to remedy it now, it's better than letting you embarrass me again. The implication was that while Leonard posed no threat to him in terms of pathway, he could utterly disgrace Pales's reputation. Every single word and content is correct and checked. Leonard's face instantly turned as red as a cooked crab, so embarrassed he wished he could immediately find a hole to crawl into. Pales shook his head at the sight, unable to help but sigh inwardly that he was still young. However, his desire to tutor Leonard was genuine. After all, if Leonard were just an ordinary mid-sequence, it would be fine, but he was now connected to him and to Klein, who was suspected of being the owner of Saphira Castle. So, tutoring him and understanding some hidden knowledge became very necessary. Forsaken land of the gods. Compared to others who lived in the outside world, Ouroboros returned home the fastest, as his home was in the forsaken land of the gods. After framing the paintings he drew today, Ouroboros left his room and went to where the true creator was. The true creator was still inverted on the cross, but his state looked much clearer than before. This was indeed the case. If before the true creator was in a state of chaos and madness for 48 out of 24 hours a day, now there would be some periods of clarity throughout the day, and now was when the true creator was leaning towards being clear-headed. Ouroboros, did you have fun today? The true creator asked. Lord, I had a lot of fun. Watching Lord pinch the sun was very happy, beating Amon was very joyful, the game was very interesting. Ouroboros knelt before the true creator and began to meticulously recount his feelings, a smile never leaving his face. After finishing his narration, Fate Angel Ouroboros concluded, it was very happy as when the Lord had not yet fallen. The true creator fell silent for a moment upon hearing this, then said, that's good. The scene then fell silent. After a while, Ouroboros said, Lord, can the Lord still return? The first, Lord, referred to the true creator, and the second, Lord, naturally referred to the ancient sun god. Chapter 180 Amon and Adam. I don't know. Facing Ouroboros' question, the true creator shook his head honestly and said, I hope I can return. The true creator knew very well that neither he nor Adam was the sun god of the past, they were merely extreme facets of each other, and though they were part of him, neither ascending to power would be the best outcome for this world. His divinity was too rational, and his humanity too insane. Even if the two merged, it would be impossible to return to how it once was. The true creator knew this deeply, which was one of the reasons he hadn't chosen to merge with Adam all these years. And if the former sun god could return, everything would no longer be a problem. But could he truly return? The true creator didn't know. He couldn't help but think of Roland, this mysterious, dangerous, yet seemingly miracle-bringing guy. Perhaps the possibility of the sun god's return lay with him. This was also one of the reasons the true creator repeatedly deepened his cooperation with Roland, even making concessions on non-principal issues. Besides the fact that Roland's summoning of the sun god could make him clearer-headed, appease Roland's emotions to prevent him from destroying the world if he was unhappy, and borrow the power of his past self to achieve certain goals, a large part of the reason the true creator adopted such a low posture in his cooperation with Roland was because the true creator saw the hope of the sun god's return in Roland. Although this hope was also very slim, it was still better than no possibility at all. I also hope the Lord can return. Ouroboros said earnestly, then paused and added, I believe the Lord can return. I will keep waiting, until that day comes. The true creator seemed to sigh. Ouroboros lowered his eyes and began his daily prayers, as always. Also in the forsaken land of the gods. Amon, who had been tragically abandoned after the gathering, was still in his original position at this moment. He sat there quietly, looking at the sun not far away. That sun, to be honest, was not as dazzling as the eternal blazing sun outside, but for Amon, this small sun created by his father was much more pleasing to the eye than the one hanging in the sky outside. Thanks to the King of Angels' excellent eyesight, Amon could naturally see the people of City of Silver bustling beneath the sun. He knew these people were busy spreading the deeds of Mr. Lucifer. They would change their faith and no longer believe in his father. And this was clearly tacitly approved, even personally promoted, by his father. But why, father? Amon was somewhat puzzled, somewhat uncomprehending, but he did nothing, because he respected the sun god's decision. Amon merely continued to look up at that sun, sitting quietly, as if in doing so he could return to a long time ago. Back to when the sun god had not yet fallen, and his world had not collapsed in an instant. Just then, Amon felt some movement beside him. He turned his head and, sure enough, saw a familiar blonde priest. What should I call you now? Amon raised his hand to pinch his monocle, looked at Adam in front of him, and curled his lips, speaking with a hint of mockery, brother or father. Adam's golden eyes looked at him. Amon met his gaze, then suddenly froze. Because Amon found that Adam's usually emotionless golden eyes seemed to have something more than before, something called emotion. Although that trace of emotion was extremely faint, it was truly present. Amon almost instinctively frowned, wanting to avoid the other's gaze, when he heard Adam's gentle voice. You can still consider me your brother, Amon. I know that besides that, me, you won't acknowledge any other, me. Backlund, Klein, Ask, Medici, and Jack Jones were bundled home, as the four of them were currently living together. Also bundled and sent back with them were Renette Tinacle and two others. They had also been together before attending the Leziran Club gathering. However, the two groups were dropped off at different locations after being sent back. Medici, I'm so hungry. Roland, in Jack's vest, yawned. Even with his deep spirituality, he couldn't hold on after the series of events today. He was struggling on the verge of falling into a coma. Eat yourself to death. Medici glanced at Roland and said grumpily, but still walked directly towards the kitchen for dinner. I'll help too. Ask also walked into the kitchen to help. Every mistake, every first, every hair, every internal, every content, one by one. Huh, didn't Mr. Lucifer come back with us? Klein noticed that someone seemed to be missing from the house and immediately asked in confusion. The old guy still has to deal with City of Silver's matters, he won't be back for the next few days. Roland waved his hand, yawned again, and mumbled, so sleepy. Of course, he wouldn't tell Klein that he, in Mr. Lucifer's vest, had already found a place to catch up on sleep. How many days have you been staying up again? Klein was used to Jack's half-closed eyes. After all, Jack was an old immortal cultivator. Staying up all night was routine, often making Klein worry that he might suddenly die from overwork. 3 days. Roland reported a number, unsure. You should rest earlier next time. If you keep this up, I'm really afraid you'll die suddenly. Klein sincerely advised. But knowledge is too tempting, I can't resist. Roland rubbed his eyes and said. Klein didn't know what to say either, so he could only sigh, deciding to put 2 goji berries in Jack's water next time. Although it seemed there wasn't such a thing in this era, Klein began to seriously recall what health-preserving medicinal materials existed in this era. By the time Medici and Ask had finished cooking, Roland seemed to be in a semi-somnambulant state. He vaguely finished dinner and then returned to his room to catch up on sleep. By the time Roland finally woke up, it was already the afternoon of the next day. Good evening. Where are Klein and the others? Roland stretched, went downstairs, and found that only Ask, who was reading a newspaper, was in the house. The others were nowhere to be seen. Klein took on a commission and seems to need to protect the client all night, so he won't be back today. I'm not too sure about Medici, but he left you a note. Ask put down the newspaper and handed over the folded letter on the coffee table. Roland took the letter and opened it, only to see a line of words, "Receive supplies, away for a few days." Roland raised an eyebrow, knowing immediately what was going on. Medici must have gone to receive the supplies tricked from Intis, and he would obviously need to process them afterward, using them where they were needed, thus requiring him to be away for a few days. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And please support the author by link in description. Chapter 181 Zhao Hong's Work Progress. I remember Little Red chose a starting point for the revolution somewhere along the border between Intis and Loan. I wonder how things are going there now. Roland pinched a letter, taking a rare few seconds to consider the progress of the revolution. As far as he knew, Medici's plan was to first stir up trouble in various places, secretly providing aid to the poor with various supplies, while also secretly spreading ideas of resistance. At the same time, he would select suitable talents for development and use them as the foundation to establish corresponding organizations. Once the time was ripe, Medici would formally launch the War of Resistance, starting from the border counties, and let the sparks of resistance ignite throughout Loan. After taking Loan, he would then consider liberating other countries. Of course, the actual implementation would involve many more details, but that was not for Roland to consider. He was not responsible for those aspects. By the way, should I go and see? After all, I had previously scheduled a speech. Roland thought for a few seconds and then happily decided to go to the site to inspect Medici's work progress. Thinking of this, Roland looked at Mr. Azik and said with a smile, "Mr. Azik, I also have something to go out for. I'll probably be back tomorrow." Mr. Azik was stunned for a moment, then showed a gentle smile and said, "All right, I understand." Then Mr. Azik saw Roland hastily put on his coat and leave the villa, looking truly urgent. For a time, the once lively villa was left with only a lonely Mr. Azik. "I've become the only idler." Mr. Azik was somewhat exasperated, yet also a little melancholic. Having grown accustomed to the lively atmosphere in the villa these past few days, now that he was the only one left, it truly made Mr. Azik unaccustomed. After some thought, Mr. Azik also put down the newspaper in his hand, preparing to go to the study upstairs to find a book on mysticism to read and further enrich his knowledge. Although he had the experience of a death consul, this world was constantly changing, and Mr. Azik had been in reincarnation for the past 1,000 years or so. It was inevitable that there were aspects he didn't understand, so he had to constantly learn to ensure no mistakes were made at critical moments. A small border town in Loan. Lunt was an ordinary worker. He had a hard but relatively stable job. The only problem was that his wages were very low, making it difficult to support his entire family through normal work, so Lunt had to work desperately overtime, wishing he could spend 18 out of 24 hours a day at his workstation. Even so, Lunte's wages could only barely feed his family, and as for savings, there was none at all. But even so, Lunt still felt that he was doing quite well. At least his family wouldn't starve, they didn't have to squeeze all 4 people into one room, and his youngest daughter could even go to church school. Perhaps after graduation, she might be able to find a better job and become a respectable person. However, just when Lunt thought his life would continue this way, he received a devastating piece of news: he was laid off. Their factory chose to downsize due to poor performance, and Lunt, as a replaceable assembly line worker, was naturally among those laid off. Even after leaving the factory gates, Lunt remained in a daze. He hoped it was a nightmare, but the feeling of the drizzling rain hitting his face told him that none of this was a nightmare. He really lost his job. Lunt suddenly felt a bit breathless. An immense sense of dread enveloped him, so much so that he even forgot to breathe. In this era, losing a job was a terrifying thing. It meant that if he couldn't find another job in time, his family would have to move out of their current apartment, move into those small, damp basements, crammed onto bunk beds. His youngest daughter would be unable to attend school because they couldn't afford tuition, and in a few more days, his family of 4 might not even be able to afford food. And Lunt was no longer young. It wouldn't be so easy for him to find another job. Lunte's hand trembled as he reached into his pocket, wanting to pull out the half-pack of cigarettes he kept there. It was his most cherished possession, Only when life was almost unbearable would he carefully smoke one to calm himself down. But this time, perhaps due to excessive fear, Lunte's trembling hands seemed to lose all strength, and after much effort, he still couldn't get the half-pack of cigarettes out. And just then, someone suddenly patted his shoulder. "Hey, Lunt, why are you standing in the rain? Aren't you afraid of getting sick?" Lunt turned his head blankly and saw a familiar face. It was his former colleague, Dissy, a young man who had been laid off a few days prior. Lunt remembered how gloomy Dissy's expression had been when he was laid off, but now Lunt found that he actually looked quite well, at least very energetic. Did he find a new job? While Lunt was wondering, Dissy had already pulled him under a building where they could shelter from the rain. Dissy then looked Lunt up and down, as if guessing something, and said, "You got laid off too?" "Yes." Lunt could only nod bitterly. "I knew it. These ******** don't care whether we live or die." Dissy probably recalled his own experience of being laid off and immediately began to curse excitedly, from the small leaders who managed them to the factory owner he had never met, thoroughly greeting their parents in 3 minutes. Lunt listened to the vigorous cursing and couldn't help but echo a few words before looking at Dissy and tentatively asking, "Dissy, did you find a job?" There was no mistake, not one single content in the entire text. The reason Lunt asked this was, of course, to naturally ask if the place where the other party worked was still hiring. Hearing Lunte's question, Dissy immediately stopped greeting the capitalists. He first looked left and right, then lowered his voice and said, "Let me tell you, I found a good place." According to Dissy's own account, a few days after he was laid off, he found a new job through a friend's introduction. The work content was simple, and it included food and lodging, with high wages. They're still hiring there now. Do you want to come over? At the end, Dissy looked at Lunt and asked. Lunt was a little tempted, but also a little worried. Although he was an uneducated fellow, he understood that good things don't just fall from the sky, and the job Dissy described sounded very much like a good thing that had fallen from the sky. Could it be a scam? Lunt hesitated. Dissy, however, seemed to see Lunte's hesitation and patted his chest, assuring him, "Don't worry, I'm definitely not a scammer. I'm not afraid to tell you, the reason I'm bringing you is because we get a reward for bringing in new people." Lunt. It sounded even more like a scam. But even with deep suspicions, Lunt ultimately chose to follow Dissy to the place he spoke of. He had no choice. If he couldn't find a new job, his entire family would eventually die. So, even though he knew the other party might be a scammer, Lunt gritted his teeth and went. Chapter 182 correct. Chapter 182 Is this right? When Lunt followed Dissy to his current workplace, he discovered it seemed to be a newly opened factory. He had heard his colleagues mention it before, something about a steel mill, and it looked like there were quite a few people there. This discovery made Lunt breathe a sigh of relief. "Dissy, you're here. The speech is about to start. If we don't go now, we won't get good seats." A man greeted Dissy when he saw him, then hurried off in a certain direction. Dissy's expression immediately became anxious, and he pulled Lunt, running in a certain direction. "Wait, what speech?" Lunt asked, completely bewildered. "You'll know when we get there." Dissy didn't explain, pulling Lunt to an open space. There were already many people gathered, and in the center of the clearing was a simply constructed stage, with a man standing on it. Lunt didn't recognize the man and didn't know what was going on. He could only follow Dissy obediently, watching as more and more people gathered in the clearing. Many of them were familiar faces, some were his former colleagues, some were his former neighbors. Just as Lunt was surprised, the man on the stage finally began to speak. They weren't flowery phrases, on the contrary, even an uneducated person like Lunt could understand them. He was talking about society, about the injustices of society. "We all work hard, some even sleeping only 4 or 5 hours a day, spending the rest of the time working. Yet, even so, the wages we receive are still meager, and if the other side is unhappy, we can even lose our jobs." Lunt thought of being fired today and couldn't help but clench his fists. "However, while we are hungry and homeless, while our children cry and ask why we have nothing to eat today, those nobles, those rich people, are holding balls. They dance under crystal chandeliers, drink with gold cutlery, pile up mountains of food, and then discard it casually." Lunt thought of his wife, who almost ruined her eyes because they couldn't afford to use lamps, and his daughters, who didn't even get a new piece of clothing all year. He was already seeing red. But is this right? Are they born nobles, born superior, and we are born slaves, destined to be oppressed by them? Many years ago, their ancestors were also just ordinary people. The speaker's voice gradually became more impassioned, carrying a strong sense of incitement. You tell me, is this right? Lunte's emotions were completely stirred up. He opened his mouth, wanting to say it wasn't right, but couldn't. In his understanding, this world had always been this way. But just then, Dissy, next to Lunt, shouted loudly, "This is not right. No one is born to be a slave. Let those so-called nobles and rich people die. We want to take back what belongs to us." This roar seemed to break some boundary, and the people in the clearing all shouted loudly. "This is not right. Down with the nobles and the rich, the world belongs to us. We want easy work too." Under these continuous roars, Lunt felt his heart beat faster than ever before. He was somewhat afraid that at this moment, a noble or a rich person would appear and arrest them all. But he was also very excited, even though Lunt himself didn't know what he was excited about. Finally, Lunt opened his mouth and shouted, "This is not right." It was a very small sound, drowned out by the continuous shouts of the crowd. Yet, Lunt felt as if a certain shackle in his heart had been broken. He spoke again, this time shouting very loudly. "We want easy work. We don't want to be slaves." Lunt didn't know how he spent the following time, he only remembered being very excited. When he came to his senses, he was already sitting at a table. "Why aren't you eating? If you're not hungry, I'll eat it." Dissy across from him was dipping bread in meat broth, eating with relish. Lunt came to his senses and, without a word, began to bury himself in his food. After he finished eating, he heard Dissy say, "Do you want to work here? If you do, I can take you to register right now." Lunt opened his mouth, not mentioning whether he wanted to work, but instead asked in a hushed voice, "What happened just now, was it serious?" Lunt wasn't stupid, or rather, even the most foolish person, after what had just happened, wouldn't think this was an ordinary factory. "I guess it's serious. What do you think our factory actually makes?" Dissy nodded, also lowering his voice. "Some of the parts our factory produces, I've seen them on those guns." Lunt felt his hands tremble a little. He wanted a cigarette again, but besides fear, there was an inexplicable emotion he couldn't quite articulate. "Aren't you afraid?" Lunt looked at Dissy, whose expression was slightly excited, and couldn't help but ask. "Afraid? Why should I be afraid?" Dissy glanced at him and said casually, "Even if I don't participate in this, will I survive?" "Don't be silly, Lunt, those masters don't care about the lives of us commoners at all. If we don't resist, this time next year you can go to my grave." "Oh, I forgot, I can't afford a burial plot. Every word, every sentence, every detail is accurate. I resisted, at least I'm still a man. Maybe later, the boss will even tell my story to others as an example. That's better than starving to death, right?" Lunt said this, taking a big gulp of meat broth. But Lunt wanted to say something but didn't know what to say. In the end, he could only ask dryly, "What if someone reports it?" PFF'd. Hearing this, Dissy burst out laughing, looking at Lunt and smiling, "So that's what you're worried about." He then reached out and hooked Lunte's shoulder, pulling him closer, and said mysteriously, "Don't worry, our boss has magical powers." Report. HMPH, let them try if they dare. Magical powers. Lunt was a bit bewildered, and various urban legends he had read flashed through his mind. Although mystery was no longer public in this era, various mysterious urban legends had never been scarce. Just then, Dissy seemed to see something, his eyes lit up, and he gestured for Lunt to look in a certain direction. "Look. The boss is here." "Huh, who is that person next to the boss?" Lunt followed Dissy's gesture and saw a handsome man whose first impression was as fiery as a flame. And walking alongside the man was someone dressed like a refined scholar. "Weapons and food are in place, and the ideological work is also going well. You're quite professional, Little Red." Roland, in his Lucifer disguise, looked through the documents Medici handed him, then glanced at the bustling workers eating their meals, and smiled as he looked at Medici. Chapter 183 Fight for Your Own Happiness. Medici didn't say anything in response to the praise, only the curve of his lips turned upward slightly. He then felt an overly intense gaze and turned his head to see a young man not far away looking at him excitedly. Medici had some impression of the other party. The other party was named Dissy, a poor wretch who, after losing his job some time ago, got drunk and accidentally got involved in an extraordinary event, only to be casually rescued by Medici who was passing by. Later, the other party joined them. Although he wasn't very literate, his mind was quite good, and his aptitude was not bad, making him someone Medici had placed on his cultivation list. "Oh, looks like you have a fanatical fan." Roland naturally also noticed Dissy's presence. He first gave a polite smile towards that direction, then teased. "This lord has many fans, do you think I'm like you? Always annoying people." Medici gave him a look back, then glanced at Roland, retorting in a sarcastic tone. "It's fine to fool your brothers, but don't fool yourself." Roland raised his hand and patted Medici's shoulder, smiling. "When it comes to annoying people, we're equally matched." Medici choked for a moment, unsure whether to lament Roland's self-awareness or tell him to get lost. "Speaking of which, have you designed the military uniforms for after the uprising? As a righteous rebel army, we should have our own uniforms, right?" Roland asked excitedly, a series of traditional styles flashing through his mind, such as the military uniform from a certain D3. To be fair, while other things about Hill might not be great, his aesthetic sense is truly good. The Great Serpent will be responsible for this aspect of the design. Medici replied. He glanced at Roland and finally asked, "What exactly are you here for?" "As your boss, of course I'm here to inspect your work progress." Roland said as a matter of course, looking at Medici and remembering something else. "Oh, right, have you decided on the exact date to formally act yet?" "Before the end of this year." Medici replied, his arms crossed. He looked at Roland and said, "What, do you have a brilliant idea?" "My thoughts are similar to yours. I think we can set the day of the uprising on New Year's Day. It just so happens that the Ruin royal family will have a big move that day. We'll operate on two fronts. We'll launch the uprising here, and there we'll severely disrupt the Ruin royal family's conspiracy, complete the deception, and report them by the way." Roland said with a smile. "By then, the Ruin royal family will inevitably have most of their attention drawn and held by the three major churches, so the resistance we face here will be much smaller." Medici glanced at him, then thought for a few seconds before nodding and saying, "All right, let's set it for that day." "Oh, right, after the uprising, besides focusing on striking those nobles and capitalists, there's one more thing." Roland beckoned to Medici, signaling him to come closer. Although Medici didn't understand why, he still leaned in, and then heard Roland say a few words to him. He immediately raised an eyebrow and looked at Roland, saying, "You still have time for this." What Roland told him was to have Medici, while clearing out the nobles and wealthy merchants, also clean up Red Street and rescue the streetwalkers there. They are also pitiful people. Some systems should not exist in the first place and should be abolished in the future. Roland said as a matter of course. "All right, since you've said so, I'll remember to arrange for people to rescue those girls." Medici, hearing him say that, naturally wasn't going to object and nodded. Saving one is saving two is also saving. They were already preparing to overthrow the existing order and rebuild Loan, so they naturally didn't mind saving those poor girls while saving workers and farmers. Lunt was still somewhat dazed when he returned home. Everything that happened today was far beyond his expectations, whether it was being fired, everything he saw with Dissy, and Lunt pulled out a few folded papers from his pocket. He didn't recognize any of the words, only knew that it was a contract. The labor contract Lunt signed with the factory where Dissy worked stipulated things Lunt had never even dreamed of before, such as an 8-hour workday, free food and lodging, and weekends off. Lunt still remembered when he signed the contract with that very refined-looking clerk. He asked if he would have to go to war after signing the contract, and the girl couldn't help but laugh. "Sir, what are you thinking? This is just a work contract. We won't force anyone to join the military." The girl said this, then seemed to think of something, and a hint of longing appeared on her face, saying, "However, if you have an interest in that, sir, you can go to the next door to sign up." Aren't you afraid no one will sign up?" Lunt remembered asking that at the time, unable to hold back. The girl was silent for a second after hearing this, then showed a smile and said, I don't know what others think, but at least I have signed up. I think what the boss said is right, happiness must be fought for. Only by hurting those tigers, leopards, and jackals will they spit out what they stole from us. What if you die then? People die in war. Lunt couldn't help but ask again. Then at least, I will die fighting for my own happiness, not because of hunger, collapsing in some corner. The girl said very firmly. Lunt didn't remember clearly what happened after that, only that he signed the contract, and when he came to his senses, he was already back home. Dad, every single one of them is impeccable. His youngest daughter's voice roused Lunt. Lunt looked at his youngest daughter, who was attending the church school. She was wearing clothes that had been washed until faded, and her figure was thinner than her peers due to long-term lack of meat. Dad, what's wrong with you? His youngest daughter looked at him in confusion. Shalia, Lunt bent down and hugged his daughter, and a thought suddenly came to his mind. His life was already like this, did he want Shalia and the others to repeat his life? Roland didn't stay with Medici for too long, only one night. He helped Medici handle some affairs, and also made a guest appearance as a speaker. After confirming that the progress here was good, Roland left Border City. After leaving, Roland had, Jack Jones, return home, lest his prolonged absence cause worry, and then, wearing the Lucifer vest, he once again arrived at the forsaken land of the gods. The sun above City of Silver was still the same as when Roland left. Roland paused when he passed the remains of a certain building, looked up at the person sitting on a half-collapsed wall, raised an eyebrow, and said with a smile, Little Crow, are you planning to build a nest here? I'm just thinking about a question. Amon looked down at Roland, his expression thoughtful. What are you thinking about? Roland was slightly curious. I'm thinking about whether I should call Adam, brother, or father. Amon raised his hand and pinched his monocle, his tone serious, but what he said was like a joke. Chapter 184 Sun God, beat Amon again. Hearing Amon's words, Roland pinched his chin and thought seriously for half a second, then said, why not just call him, Daddy Bro? See, that way he's both a daddy and a brother. Of course, if you don't like it, Brother Daddy, works too. Amon was silent for a few seconds, then said seriously, I'm afraid Adam wouldn't like that title. Roland immediately showed a puzzled expression, looking at him strangely, as if he didn't understand why he said that, and asked, you still care about that? I really don't care about that. Hearing Roland's words, Amon was stunned for a moment, then laughed, and while laughing, he jumped down from the wall, saying, it's decided, from now on I'll call Adam, Brother Daddy. Good taste. Roland immediately clapped like a seal. Amon glanced at him, and suddenly said, it's hard to imagine that just a few days ago, you organized people to beat me up, and yet now we can joke around here. It's normal, isn't it? After all, you can't beat me and you have a favor to ask of me. Roland spread his hands, saying generously, if it were the other way around, we definitely wouldn't be able to be so harmonious right now, because I would definitely kill you. It's different now, the grudge I had against you has mostly faded after I beat you up, and although you wish you could kill me, unfortunately, you can't beat me, nor can you make a move. This frank attitude made Amon choke for a moment before he said, you are truly honest. Sincerity is one of my many inconspicuous virtues. Roland showed a brilliant smile. Amon. After a few seconds of silence, Amon suddenly said sincerely, I don't think we're the same kind of people anymore. At least, I'm not as shameless as you. That only proves that your Joker purity isn't enough, a true Joker should be fearless. Roland spoke eloquently, then thought of something else, looking at Amon confusedly, and asked, so what exactly are you here for? He didn't think Amon was waiting here for him just to ponder the issue of titles. I think someone shouldn't have forgotten what he promised me. Amon glanced at him, saying grumpily, oh, so you want to see your daddy, you should have said so earlier. Roland just remembered that there was indeed such a thing, nodded, and then reached out and pulled in the air. The next second, the figure of Ancient Sun God appeared in the air. Ancient Sun God opened his eyes, his gaze instinctively scanning around, and he hesitated when he saw Amon next to Roland, then looked at Roland and asked, another beating. Apparently, the combination of Roland plus Amon had already formed a fixed mindset for Ancient Sun God. His first reaction upon seeing the two together was that Roland had called him to beat his child again. As soon as he said this, Amon's visibly joyful expression immediately froze on his face, and it was unclear if he was recalling some unpleasant memories. PFF'd. Ha ha ha. Roland, on the other hand, laughed unceremoniously. After he had enough, he looked at Sun God and said, "What are you thinking? I just pulled you out to catch up with Amon. Grisha, don't be so violent, always thinking about beating your child." Ancient Sun God. Is there a possibility that he is not the violent one? Facing Roland's reverse psychology and self-righteous behavior, Ancient Sun God was a little helpless and a little amused, but in the end, he was slightly relieved. After all, Ancient Sun God is truly a doting parent. Although he was very disappointed with Amon's various actions and didn't mind teaching him a lesson, he had just beaten him 2 days ago. Although he didn't do it himself, his future self did, and beating him again so soon would make Ancient Sun God feel a little heartache. Tisk, that's why they say a naughty child must have a doting parent. Grisha, you spoil your son too much. Roland clearly saw what Ancient Sun God was thinking, shook his head, and complained. Ancient Sun God showed a bitter smile upon hearing this. He looked at Amon, his gaze filled with both heartache and tenderness, as well as an unresolved melancholy. Ancient Sun God sighed and said, "Amon is my only child after all. He went down the wrong path, and it's also because I fell too early and didn't teach him well. Are you going to say next that he's essentially a good child?" Roland pinched his chin and suddenly interjected. Ancient Sun God pursed his lips. He looked at Amon, not denying it, and said, "I believe Amon will have a day when he turns over a new leaf." Amon, at this moment, dared not meet his father's gaze. Even though he had countless ideas for this reunion in his heart, he had never expected to hear such words. Listening to Ancient Sun God express his partiality and expectations for him, Amon found it hard to describe the emotions surging in his heart at this moment. Regret, shame, it seemed a bit of both, yet not quite either. As expected of you, this parental filter is amazing, but... Roland thought of the original fated future, paused, then muttered, "It can't be considered wrong either." Although this Amon is hard to comment on now, after studying in the future starry sky, Amon indeed gained some humanity to a certain extent and contributed to saving the world. Not one error, one sentence, one word, one character, one content, in one glance. But this premise is that Amon can possess humanity. Roland's gaze fell on Amon, he shook his head and said, "At least the current him, getting beaten is completely justified." Ancient Sun God clearly heard something, which made him show a slightly relieved smile, and then said, "Amon should indeed pay the price for his past mistakes. He is a doting parent, but also a reasonable person, otherwise, Ancient Sun God would not have supported Roland's previous beating of Amon." "Did you hear that, little crow? Your daddy's attitude towards you. Do you still think having humanity is unnecessary now?" Roland suddenly reached out and patted Amon's shoulder, saying. Amon came back to his senses. He looked up at Roland, then at Ancient Sun God, and meeting the latter's gentle and encouraging gaze, he almost instinctively raised his hand and pinched the monocle on his face, saying, "I understand." Click. Roland, who had calmly captured this scene, put down his camera and then said with a smile, "I seem a bit superfluous here, so I'll see you later, both of you. You two can have a good catch-up for a while now." Roland had no habit of prying into others' privacy, so he didn't mind giving this long-separated father and son some private time. "Thank you, Roland," Ancient Sun God said in a gentle voice. At the same time, his golden eyes looked at Amon, as if wondering why Amon wasn't reacting. Meeting his father's gaze, even if somewhat reluctantly, Amon could only say, "Thank you. Then I'll accept these two, thank yous. Bye-bye." Roland replied with a grin, quite pleased with Amon's reluctant thanks. After all, he liked Amon's rebellious yet obedient demeanor. As soon as Roland finished speaking, he swiftly disappeared from the spot, heading towards City of Silver. Chapter 185, The Past of Amon in the Sun Realm. The Ancient Sun God and Amon, left behind, did not immediately catch up. This father and son, reunited after a long separation, or rather, a temporal displacement, fell into silence almost immediately after Roland left. An awkward and complex atmosphere enveloped the area, and neither of them spoke. Several seconds later, the ancient sun god sighed and took the initiative to speak. Do you mind walking around here with me, Amon? Amon heard this, raised his hand to pinch the monocle on his face, nodded, and said, okay. So the two of them began to stroll through the ruins not far from City of Silver. After walking for a while, the ancient sun god suddenly said, in my timeline, just a short while ago, I brought you here once. I don't know if you still remember that. Amon's footsteps paused. His gaze swept over the surroundings, falling on the dilapidated buildings. A long-sealed memory finally opened a crack at this moment. Amon suddenly remembered that he had indeed been here, a long, long time ago. It was a sunny afternoon, and as a young cub, he had a rare chance to see the sun god, who was usually nowhere to be found. So, despite Medici's dissuasion, the young him hugged the sun god's leg. Amon remembered that he seemed to have said something at that time. What was it? Daddy, don't go. It seemed to be that sentence. Amon couldn't quite remember either, as he was truly too young then. But for some reason, he still clearly remembered the sun god's reaction at the time. The sun god, who had never personally cared for a child and always left them to Medici or Saussure, seemed to freeze at Amon's surprise attack. After several seconds, he regained control of his limbs, bent down, and peeled him off his leg, saying in a gentle voice, Amon, father has something to do. Wah. Although it was embarrassing to admit, Amon remembered that he, being very young at the time, did indeed cry directly. The memory after that was very blurry, only remembering that the sun god seemed to have coaxed him for a long time, with Medici's annoying voice occasionally coming from the side. Later, the sun god seemed to have promised him something. When the young Amon came to his senses, he had already been brought to this vicinity by his father. The sun god had important business to do here, and Amon, who was only as tall as his leg, was led by him like a little tail, following by his side. And then, Amon looked at the surrounding ruins and suddenly said, I remember this was a garden. After you finished what you needed to do, father, you brought me to sit on a stone bench in the center of the garden and wove a flower crown for me with those flowers. So you still remember. The ancient sun god also looked in that direction, his gaze both gentle and melancholic, saying, for you, that must have been a long time ago, but for me, it was only a short while ago. The ancient sun god turned his head to look at Amon and said, Amon, I am not the father you are familiar with, because I have not yet participated in your future life. I don't know what we experienced together in those futures where I had not yet fallen, nor do I know what exactly happened to you after my fall. For me, you were clearly just a little squirt who only reached my waist yesterday, a child who, though a bit mischievous, was still adorable. But it seems like in the blink of an eye, you grew up, growing into a stranger to me. The ancient sun god lowered his eyes at this point, his expression seemingly a little lost. Fate played a trick on me, revealing a cruel future to me, which made me very painful at one point, but I am also very fortunate. The ancient sun god looked up at Amon and said earnestly, fortunate that at least after I opened my eyes in the future, what I received was news of my own death. Fortunate that the first person I saw was you, already grown up. Fortunate that my child could finally grow into an adult. Amon, facing the ancient sun god's earnest expression, almost froze in place. After a long while, he hooked the corner of his mouth and said, that doesn't sound like something you would say. I thought you would be disappointed in me. I am indeed very disappointed, but I am equally fortunate that you are still alive. The ancient sun god did not deny it. He looked at Amon and smiled, saying, so I am not a good savior, nor am I a good father. I am neither fair enough, nor can I devote enough personal bias to you. That sounds really disappointing, doesn't it? No. Amon, who had been silent, suddenly spoke. He looked up at the ancient sun god, finally meeting those golden eyes. I have never been disappointed in you, father. Every family has its own troubles. Parent-child relationships are indeed one of the most difficult problems in the world. Fortunately, I have neither a father nor a mother, I was born an orphan. After leaving the ancient sun god and Amon, Roland sighed in his heart and casually told himself a dark joke. Roland, who had successfully amused himself with a dark joke, shook his head and looked up at City of Silver in the distance. He saw that a certain training squad had clearly noticed his presence. Some people walked towards him, while others ran towards a building, probably to inform the City of Silver high-ranking officials. So, a moment later, City of Silver's chief, Colin Iliad, hurried to Roland's front and bowed to him. "Good day, Lucifer." It was clear that Colin Iliad had run very quickly, and he looked relieved. All content is in one go. Roland knew why. After all, he had told Colin Iliad that he would be back in a while. But man proposes, God disposes. Roland had too much fun during the subsequent Amon beating operation and forgot about City of Silver. Later, because of a lack of spirituality, he was so tired he was practically dying, making it even more impossible to spare time for City of Silver. It was precisely because of this that from the perspective of City of Silver's chief, an angel said he would be back in a while but then disappeared for several days without any news. Although this was normal from an angel's time perspective, City of Silver had a precedent of being abandoned by their lord, so they naturally suffered from a bit of PTSD. "I had to deal with something urgent temporarily, sorry for the wait," Roland explained with a smile, looking at Colin Iliad and saying unhurriedly, "Today, I will lead people out of the forsaken land of the gods. I hope you all are ready. Everyone on the list who will leave City of Silver with your highness is ready." Colin Iliad lowered his head and answered respectfully. Although his voice was generally calm, there was still a hint of excitement in the details. City of Silver had waited for this day for too long. Although only a few people were leaving this time, it was a huge step for City of Silver to break free from its predicament and go to the outside world. Chapter 186 Have you ever resented the Creator? Colin Iliad had already handled everything in the days Lucifer was absent, arranging for a temporary chief to lead City of Silver in his stead, and preparing contingency plans for any unexpected situations. He was just waiting for this day to arrive, to serve as a vanguard to the outside world, to scout out the situation for City of Silver, and to prepare for the future relocation of the city's inhabitants. Roland naturally saw Colin Iliad's excitement. He merely smiled at this and said, "Walk with me through the city. If you have some good stories, you can tell them to me." Colin Iliad's expression immediately turned serious. Having learned about the personality of the angel before him from little son Derek, he had naturally prepared accordingly. He led Roland into the city like a qualified guide, narrating the stories he had long prepared. The stories Colin Iliad told were not about others, but about his own experiences. As the chief of City of Silver, Colin Iliad's life could be described as colorful and full of adventures. Due to the curse of City of Silver, it perfectly fit the definition of having faced difficult choices. Because of the negative effects of a certain sealed artifact, the people of City of Silver had to be killed by their direct blood relatives, otherwise they would turn into terrifying monsters. It could be said that every person in City of Silver was destined to bear the sin of kinslaying. Roland listened quietly, then suddenly looked at Colin Iliad and said, "Is it painful? That sealed artifact allows you to survive in this darkness, but it also forces you to bear the sin of kinslaying." Colin Iliad paused, probably not expecting Roland to ask so suddenly, or rather, not expecting Roland to be so clear about the secrets of City of Silver. But thinking of the other party's identity, Colin Iliad felt relieved. Colin Iliad was silent for only a second, choosing not to lie, but to honestly say, "Of course it's painful, but we have no choice." The reason City of Silver could become one of the only two surviving cities in the forsaken land of the gods was because of the black-faced grass brought by that sealed artifact. Otherwise, City of Silver would have long been annihilated. Very honest. Roland smiled and continued, "I'm very curious, have you ever resented the Creator who abandoned you?" Colin Iliad fell silent, opening his mouth after a long time, his voice slightly hoarse. "Occasionally, I don't know what others think, but I did once resent the Creator who abandoned us. So sometimes I would also think, is it because of this, because we were not pious enough, that the Lord, the Creator abandoned us?" Colin Iliad had truly believed in the ancient sun god. Even though City of Silver had fallen into darkness when he was born, growing up immersed in the legends, Colin Iliad inevitably developed faith in the legendary sun god. But the more he believed, the more powerless Colin Iliad felt when facing the current situation of City of Silver. As the chief of City of Silver, he could clearly feel how terrible the situation of City of Silver was. This city, which had persevered in the darkness for over 1,000 years, was already on the verge of falling, and with just a slight push, it would completely plunge into the abyss. So occasionally, Colin Iliad did indeed resent the Creator. He was not a devout believer of the Creator. Compared to a god he had never seen, he cared more about the safety of City of Silver. These people were his responsibility. Roland naturally saw Colin Iliad's complex emotions hidden in his few words, and he could understand this. After all, City of Silver had believed in the ancient sun god for so many years, it could be said that their faith was already engraved in their DNA. Even if they converted now, this inertia would not be eliminated in a short time. Roland lowered his eyes. A thick book had appeared in his hand at some point. Roland opened the book, casually flipped to a page, and then said, "He did not abandon you because you were not pious enough." Colin Iliad looked up at him in astonishment. Roland, however, continued to gaze at the open page, and although it was blank, he acted as if he could truly see something, saying, "The ancient sun god, the creator whom your City of Silver believes in, he had already fallen before the cataclysm. More precisely, the reason the cataclysm occurred was because of his fall." Colin Iliad's mind went blank. For a moment, he even suspected he was hallucinating, but his excellent physique as a demon hunter told Colin Iliad that he was not hallucinating. At this moment, Colin Iliad even felt a sense of absurdity. It turned out that the Creator had not abandoned them, he had merely fallen. For a moment, Colin Iliad didn't even know whether to cry or laugh, or whether he should feel sorrow for City of Silver. But Colin Iliad was, after all, the chief of City of Silver. He quickly adjusted his emotions and bowed his head deeply, saying, "Thank you for telling us this, Your Highness Lucifer. Please rest assured, since you have saved us, whether the Creator is still here or not, the faith of City of Silver will only belong to you, only to Fool." Colin Iliad then guaranteed. He didn't know why Lucifer suddenly told him this truth, nor whether the other party did it for amusement or to warn him. All Colin Iliad could do was offer what the other party needed. City of Silver could not be abandoned again, they could not bear the cost. The next second, Colin Iliad heard the angel opposite him chuckle. The other party's voice was gentle as he said, "No need to be nervous, I am not questioning your faith. I was just curious about your reaction to knowing the truth. I must say, it's as interesting as I thought it would be." Despite the incredibly gentle voice, at this moment, Colin Iliad felt a chill. Only now did he truly experience the malice of the angel before him. But no matter how malicious the other party was, this was City of Silver's only hope, so Colin Iliad said nothing. Every word, every sentence, every paragraph, every content, one by one. Roland was not surprised by this reaction. He chuckled very Lucifer-like, and his peripheral vision caught the other people of City of Silver, seeing expressions of worship and yearning in their eyes when they looked at him. Clearly, Colin Iliad had been diligently promoting Lucifer these past few days, which was why this situation occurred. "You've worked hard," Roland praised. Colin Iliad was momentarily stunned, then realized what Roland was saying, and immediately replied, "This is what I should do." Roland took out his pocket watch, glanced at it, confirmed the time, and said, "Gather the people who went out, prepare yourselves. We can depart soon." "Understood, Your Highness Lucifer." Colin Iliad immediately responded. Chapter 187 Amon even cheated the sun god. While Colin Iliad gathered those who were going out and made the final arrangements for City of Silver before their departure, Roland, following his perception of the ancient sun god, found the father and son strolling in the ruins. Compared to before Roland left, the atmosphere between the ancient sun god and Amon, father and son, was clearly much more harmonious. At least the awkwardness from when Roland departed was gone, and they were even chatting happily. "Though I really don't want to disturb you, I still have to say, the good times are over. Get ready, I'll be taking City of Silver's advanced team out of the forsaken land of the gods soon." Roland smiled and spoke to the father and son. The ancient sun god and Amon exchanged glances. Under the former's encouraging gaze, the latter raised a hand to pinch the monocle on his face, then spoke, "Perhaps you wouldn't mind my help." "Oh, is this the naughty kid getting a complete makeover into a good boy?" Roland raised an eyebrow, teased, and watched Amon with the gaze one would give a rare creature, saying with a smile, "So, little crow baby, how do you want to help?" "Among my avatars traveling outside, some manage decent businesses that can help them adapt to the outside world as quickly as possible. Although a bit awkward at first, after the initial sentence, Amon's subsequent words flowed much more smoothly. Although you possess mysterious power, I'm afraid you're not suitable to be a guide for them to live in the outside world. In the Aurora Order, Amon paused here before smiling and saying, do you expect a bunch of lunatics to do a good job of this? Roland was uncharacteristically silent because Amon's words made a lot of sense. He certainly hadn't thought of personally guiding the people of City of Silver to live in the outside world, not only because he was afraid of trouble, but also because the people of City of Silver themselves probably wouldn't want that. So Roland's original plan was indeed to hand it over to the Aurora Order, but now, hearing Amon's words, he hesitated. The foolish beauties of the Aurora Order were indeed very obedient, but whether they could be reliable in this matter was hard to say. After all, the foolish beauties of the Aurora Order themselves didn't exactly lead normal lives in the outside world. But if the Aurora Order isn't reliable, are you reliable? Roland didn't hide his doubt at all, looking at Amon and asking. He knew very well that even though Amon seemed incredibly well behaved now, it was all based on his father's presence, it was clearly just an act of obedience. But even if it's an act, at least until my goal is achieved, I will be an obedient good child, won't I? Amon clearly understood Roland's concerns and spoke openly, you still hold the candy I need, so why not give me a little trust? Roland narrowed his eyes. He suddenly smiled, looking at Amon and saying, as expected of you. Then, Roland reached out and patted Amon's shoulder, saying, since you've come to offer me free labor, why should I refuse? I can hand the people over to you, but if anything happens to them. Roland paused here, then his smile became even brighter, and his gaze towards Amon carried a warning, saying, you probably won't ever get to see your father again. In any case, the people of City of Silver were now Roland's people, so Roland naturally wouldn't allow Amon to mess around. What a powerful threat, Amon remarked, then looked at Roland and said with a smile, please rest assured, even if it's just to avoid disappointing father, I won't do anything unnecessary. Roland then also gave a fake smile, and looked meaningfully at the ancient sun god, teasing, it seems you taught him a lesson. Just filling in some of the gaps in education these past years. The ancient sun god said gently. Indeed, education from one's own father is the most effective, even Amon looks somewhat human now. Roland sighed, then as if remembering something, said, oh, by the way, Grisha, there's something I forgot to ask. After Saussure went back last time, did he ask you for an 8-hour workday and weekends off? As soon as these words came out, the ancient sun god's gentle smile immediately stiffened. He looked at Roland with a somewhat helpless expression and said, Saussure is my avatar, and also another me. I know, but avatars should have human rights, right? Roland spread his hands, looking at the ancient sun god and saying, enslaving avatars isn't good. As the saying goes, resist the tyranny of the main body, the world belongs to avatars. Those who don't treat their avatars well will eventually be overthrown. Sun god, you wouldn't fail to understand this, would you? The ancient sun god fell silent again. He then said in a subtle tone, is there a possibility that Saussure is willing? Willingness under duress is not willingness. Does the sun god really need me to teach him such a simple truth? Roland spoke with conviction, even reaching out and pulling Amon beside him, saying, for example, this Amon here, some of his avatars have willingly stayed in City of Silver for over a decade, some have acted as traps in a certain treasure vault for 1,000 years, and some have been kicked into the Chaos Sea. Were they all willing? Before Amon's main body could answer, a palm-sized Amon avatar materialized from the air beside them and loudly replied, of course not willingly, we were all forced by the main body. From this, it can be seen that Amon is indeed a joker, willing to prank even his own father when he's having fun. Don't talk nonsense. Every action is the result of a full Amon referendum. If you're not popular among the Amon collective, don't blame the main body. Amon's main body pushed the monocle on his face and looked at the avatar with a smile. Roland, meanwhile, spread his hands, then looked at the ancient sun god and said, so you see, that's how it is. If the main body exploits the avatars too much, they will resist. Ancient sun god. At this moment, even though he knew Roland might just be trying to poach Saussure, the ancient sun god still reflected for a moment, had he really suppressed Saussure too much? No, What am I thinking? The ancient sun god shook his head with a wry smile, suppressing the strange thoughts, then looked at Roland and said, I will consider giving Saucerier some appropriate rest time, but Roland, don't keep thinking about Saucerier. He is my avatar after all. Would you want an extra spy by your side? No mistake, one song, one send, one content, one by one. I'd be willing. Roland looked at him inexplicably and said, it's just a spy. That kid atom is constantly merging into the air, do you see me caring about it? Ancient sun god. He almost forgot, Roland's views on certain aspects were different from ordinary people. The ancient sun god, feeling helpless, decided to change the subject and said, I wonder when I can go to Moon City. In 2 more days. It's definitely too late today. You know, the time I can summon you each day is limited. Roland was speaking the truth. Although his spirituality was quite abundant now, the ancient sun god was, after all, a half-old one, and the consumption was still very large. The remaining summoning capacity for today was certainly not enough to deal with matters in Moon City. Good. The ancient sun god had no objections. Then I'll go put the people from City of Silver into the different space first. After that, I'll trouble Mr. Sun God to help us leave. Roland said with a smile, looking at the ancient sun god. The ancient sun god naturally would not object, this was one of the agreed upon terms from before. Chapter 188, Danitz refreshed in the City of Generosity. Let's go, the bright world promised by the Creator is just beyond this door. Hearing the angel's voice, tinged with a slight smile, Colin Iliad took a step forward and entered the circular door that appeared in the exotic space. The first thing he felt was a blinding light. The sunlight was even more dazzling than that of little son Derek in the forsaken land of the gods, illuminating every corner of where Colin Iliad stood, making him instinctively narrow his eyes. When he looked up, he saw a blazing sun hanging high in the sky. Even after being baptized by the Creator's handmaid little son Derek, Colin Iliad was still deeply shocked by the sun that illuminated the entire world at this moment. This was a feeling that people accustomed to the sun would not have, an indescribable spiritual impact. Then, Colin Iliad lowered his head, no longer looking at the fervent sun, and instinctively surveyed his surroundings. He found that they seemed to be in an unfamiliar city, whose architectural style Colin Iliad had never seen before. It was different from the ruins he had explored and also different from what was recorded in ancient texts. The only problem was probably that it was a bit short. Colin Iliad compared the doors and windows of these buildings with City of Silver and confirmed that if they wanted to live in these buildings, the children would be fine, but adults would probably have to bend down from time to time, otherwise they would easily hit the ceiling. After all, due to generations of a large number of citizens following the warrior pathway, people in City of Silver were generally taller, with people over 2 meters being commonplace. In City of Silver, being under 2 meters usually only meant 2 things, being a child, or stunted growth. Finally, Colin Iliad smelled a certain scent. It was a very fragrant smell, yet different from the tempting scents Colin Iliad had encountered when facing monsters. However, Colin Iliad felt himself being tempted. His stomach rumbled, and he couldn't help but swallow, an unbidden deep craving arising within him. Chief, it smells so good, what is this fragrance? Little son Derek also couldn't help but swallow, looking at Colin Iliad and whispering. It wasn't just him, the other members of City of Silver's advanced team weren't much better. It wasn't that their wills weren't firm enough, it was simply that the people of City of Silver had eaten black-faced grass and monsters for over 1,000 years, and had absolutely no resistance to the scent of normal food. After all, the craving for food is one of humanity's most fundamental desires. Everyone, control yourselves, Colin Iliad suppressed his instinctive craving and said in a deep voice, then looked at Roland and said sincerely, my apologies, His Highness Lucifer, we have been impolite. It's fine, I understand you. Roland smiled and said unhurriedly, I was planning to take you on a tour here first, but since you're all hungry, let's go have lunch first. At this point, Roland gave Amon next to him a look, implying, please begin your performance. You really are not polite at all. Amon pushed up the glasses on his face and glanced at Roland. Didn't you want to take on this task yourself? I'm giving you a chance to show off, Roland said righteously, without any embarrassment. As for Ancient Sun God, he had naturally returned to his original spacetime. Amon didn't argue with Roland. He looked at Colin Iliad and the others, revealing a smile that held little emotion, and said, "There's a restaurant of mine nearby. Follow me." Colin Iliad was slightly hesitant. He wasn't clear about Amon's identity, only knowing that this person had come to pick them up with Lucifer. Later, in the exotic space, Lucifer had introduced him, saying that he would help them better adapt to the outside world. However, His Highness Lucifer hadn't introduced much about his identity, only simply telling them his name, Amon. The other people from City of Silver might be unfamiliar with this name, but Colin Iliad had some impression. In City of Silver's prison, there was still a suspicious person detained who had come into contact with Amon. This inevitably made Colin Iliad have some doubts about Amon's existence, but considering that he was arranged by His Highness Lucifer after all, he nodded and said, "Thank you, Mr. Amon." "No trouble at all, these are all things I should do." Amon pushed up the glasses on his face and said with a smile. If one were to ask why Amon suddenly took on the task of guiding City of Silver, the reason was simple: he decided to experience what humanity truly was. So he first decided to find some people to observe carefully and deepen his understanding of humanity, and these people from City of Silver were undoubtedly excellent subjects for observation. "Let's go." Roland gestured to Colin Iliad and then chuckled, saying, "Don't worry, Amon's personality is indeed a bit unpleasant, but he shouldn't do anything to you. Of course, if he truly crosses the line, you can tell me. I've told you what to do." Hearing this, Colin Iliad immediately hesitated, wanting to speak but holding back, then wanting to speak again. For a moment, he really wanted to ask the angel in front of him, did their church have any normal high-ranking members? Why did one after another seem to have such unpleasant personalities? But Colin Iliad ultimately didn't ask, only saying, "I believe your arrangements will be fine." The group walked out of the deserted alley and quickly attracted the attention of others, as the people of City of Silver were simply too tall, giving people the intuitive feeling of being little giants, with a 200% return rate on the street. "Shit, are these people from the God of War Church?" A slightly surprised voice sounded nearby. The voice wasn't loud and was easy to overlook, but Roland still caught it. He glanced in that direction, then raised an eyebrow. He saw a man in a black cloak, appearing to be in his 30s, with slightly messy golden hair and clear blue eyes untainted by knowledge. His face was covered in white powder, likely a disguise, though it was useless. At least Roland, who had seen his wanted poster, recognized him at a glance: a regular member of the ice cream tutoring class, the quartermaster of Golden Dream, Gehrman's loyal red maid in the original work, Mr. Fool's future divine envoy, now with a bounty of £3,000 and destined to become a £10,000 gentleman, with a brain like a decoration, and a terrible disguise ability, Flaming Danitz. So generous city really does randomly spawn Danitz, huh? Of course, maybe this is the destined attraction between City of Silver and Danitz. Roland mused inwardly, then turned his head to look at the bewildered people of City of Silver, the corners of his mouth curving up slightly. After all, this was fun delivered right to his doorstep. Chapter 189, setting a bottom line for Amon. Is there something wrong with him? Amon naturally noticed Roland's abnormality, and likewise looked at Danitz, raising his hand to pinch the monocle on his face, and asked. As Amon spoke, Danitz, though not very smart but possessing the intuition of a small animal, also sensed that something was amiss. He took a step back, intending to turn and blend into the crowd, but as soon as he retreated, he bumped into someone. "Sorry, please excuse me, I'm in a hurry." Danitz apologized instinctively. Although he was a pirate, due to Iceberg Admiral's teachings, this quartermaster of the Golden Dream was clearly very polite. However, when Danitz clearly saw the person he had accidentally bumped into, his voice abruptly stopped. Because Danitz found that the person he bumped into also wore a monocle, and when he apologized, that person also raised a hand to pinch the monocle on his face, an action identical to one of the people he had just seen. Though there was no apparent reason, at this moment, Danitz's spirituality began to warn him. "Sir, are you nervous? Perhaps you need help. Your face is so pale, are you suffering from a sudden illness?" The crowd surrounded him, each voice full of concern, as if this was not generous city, full of pirates, but some small town with simple folk customs. However, Danitz's expression grew even paler, his fingertips even trembling slightly. Because all these people wore monocles, though their faces were different, they seemed like the same face. Shit. What has he encountered? Is this still Generous City, Byam? Danitz stopped thinking. Don't scare people, and also release the possession on these people. Humans are not your toys. If you can't change this bad habit, I will personally talk to your father. A strange voice sounded in Danitz's ear. The voice was not gentle but easily pulled Danitz out of his fear. He widened his eyes, breathing heavily, looking utterly terrified. And the people around Danitz began to cough, and soon a pile of worm of times were coughed out, then disappeared. What happened? Danitz's mind was a blur. Sorry, it's a habit. I did it before my brain could even react. I'll try my best to restrain myself from doing it again. Immediately after, Danitz heard another voice. For some reason, upon hearing this voice, he inexplicably shivered. So terrifying. The people around Danitz, however, seemed to have completely forgotten what had just happened. They looked around in confusion, then scattered like birds and beasts. The City of Silver people who witnessed all this. At this moment, Colin Iliad finally had a profound understanding of what Mr. Lucifer meant by, Amon's personality is a bit nasty. At the same time, a trace of worry arose in his heart. They aren't really believing in some evil god now, are they? They don't look like decent people. But then, Colin Iliad suppressed this trace of worry and looked at Mr. Lucifer, who was walking towards Danitz, his resolve renewed. No matter what, Mr. Lucifer had already brought light to City of Silver. Whether out of gratitude or other reasons, they had no retreat. Then let's steadfastly go all the way. How do you feel? Roland walked up to the terrified and bewildered Danitz, a rare trace of pity rising in his heart for this unfortunate child. Amon's actions were too fast. By the time Roland noticed, it was too late to stop him. Fortunately, what Danitz experienced was better than what Hella's family experienced, which was a complete transformation. It shouldn't leave too deep a psychological shadow, right? Roland thought with some uncertainty, also curious as to why Danitz would appear here. I'm fine. Danitz finally recovered. He looked at Roland, then at Amon, who was quietly watching him a few steps away, and practically squeezed out a sentence from his throat, then forced a smile. Roland glanced at Amon, who immediately showed an innocent smile. I didn't do anything else to him, Amon said, feigning grievance. You just standing here is already a kind of torment for him. Roland said grumpily, then looked at Danitz and smiled. I'm sorry, Amon just wanted to play a joke on you. As an apology, let us treat you to a meal. Don't worry, he won't hurt you again. Danitz's eyes widened when he heard this. He really wanted to refuse, but the words that came to his mouth still turned into, oh okay, you're too kind. Roland naturally saw Danitz's resistance, and he decided to ignore it. After all, it would be such a pity not to tease Red Maid after encountering him. So what's the difference between you and me? Amon asked genuinely. Not a single error, a single word, a single hair, a single content, look at it. There's no difference. I've never denied that I'm a bad guy. Roland glanced at him, not at all embarrassed. Is this what you call humanity? Amon was already used to Roland's shamelessness. He just looked at Roland and asked genuinely again, it seems there's no difference from me. No, there is. At least I have a bottom line, and you don't. Roland looked at Amon and said seriously, Amon, you should also draw a line for yourself, no matter for whom. Upon hearing this, Amon raised a hand to pinch the monocle on his face, then said, then what kind of line do you think I should draw? At the very least, you should establish respect for life. Killing is fine, but killing for pleasure is not a good habit. Roland gazed into Amon's dark eyes and said with a smile, this is also my bottom line. Having fun is fine, but killing innocents or causing innocent people to have a mental breakdown for fun is not. Sounds like a low bottom line. Amon lowered his eyes, saying, not knowing what he was thinking. Because I'm not a good person either. If you wish, you can also restrain yourself according to your father's standards, I don't care anyway. Roland spread his hands, saying indifferently. Amon was silent for a moment, probably recalling the ancient sun god's standards for dealing with people, and finally said seriously, I think even turning over a new leaf has to be step by step. Let's just follow your standards for now. Although Amon greatly admired his father, asking Amon to fully agree with sun god's worldview and values, and to demand himself by his standards, that was too terrifying. Amon rarely felt a trace of fear. Tisk. Roland was not surprised by Amon's reaction. He shook his head, then looked at the people of City of Silver and said with a smile, "You've waited long enough. Let's continue towards the restaurant." The people of City of Silver said nothing, and no one objected. So the group once again headed briskly towards Amon's restaurant, only this time, there was an additional red maid in the team, timid as a quail. Chapter 190 let Amon experience the life of ordinary people. When Roland finally arrived at the restaurant's entrance, he looked up at the Intis restaurant with a large monocle drawn on its sign and raised an eyebrow. He then led the way, pushing open the restaurant door. Upon entering, a waiter came to greet him. It was worth noting that this waiter wore a white uniform and also had a monocle on his face. However, unlike those temporarily possessed beings, this was simply an Amon clone. Roland's gaze swept over the other people in the restaurant. He didn't see any other diners, but he did see several Amon waiters. To welcome everyone's arrival, our restaurant has specially suspended service to other guests, the first Amon waiter said with a professional smile. The expressions of the City of Silver residents immediately became subtle. Danitz, on the other hand, looked like he was about to faint. Roland, however, looked at the Amon waiter with great interest. After following him to their seats, he said, "So this is an Amon-themed restaurant. Who's the chef? Is it also you? We have a dedicated chef Amon responsible for cooking. Please rest assured, guests, Chef Amon's culinary skills are absolutely reliable and have always been well liked. He can certainly prepare dishes that will satisfy our guests," the first Amon waiter said with a smile, like a truly professional waiter. As he spoke, the first Amon waiter handed the menu to Roland. "So, are you also the king of part-timers?" Roland wasn't in a hurry to order. Instead, after pinching his chin and thinking for a second, he suddenly turned his head to Amon and asked, "Postman, waiter, chef, what else?" Although he didn't know what meme Roland was referring to, Amon naturally understood the phrase, king of part-timers, whose meaning was obvious, and said without changing his expression, "I just like to experience different lives. You should understand that it gets very boring if you keep doing the same thing repeatedly." "Indeed, but you've experienced it for so many years and still haven't understood what humanity is. This shows that your experience isn't grounded enough, it's just superficial experiencing, essentially still just playing house," Roland commented. Amon glanced at Roland, as if he had thought of something, and said, "So you mean I should be like you? That's not necessary. Have you ever considered truly experiencing the life of an ordinary person?" Roland suddenly thought of an interesting game and looked at him excitedly. "Tell me about it." Amon's eyebrow twitched, he had a bad premonition, but he still gave face and asked. "For example, sealing your power, sealing your memories, and then, as an ordinary person, experiencing the joys and sorrows of this world," Roland said with a smile. Amon pondered for a few seconds, then looked at Roland and said sincerely, "I feel like you just want to play with me." "You guessed right." Roland nodded, admitting it. Amon. Even though he was somewhat used to Roland's frankness, Amon was uncharacteristically speechless at this moment. He took a deep breath and said, "There's no way I can let my true body do that. I have too many enemies in the outside world. I don't need your true body to do that. A clone will suffice." And, Roland paused here, took a sip of the black tea handed to him by the first Amon waiter next to him, and then smiled at Amon. "Do you really have a distinction between true body and clone? It's just the largest clone versus the not-so-powerful ones. For you, every clone can be the true body. Unlike Saussure, a clone of the sun god with an independent will, Amon's clones and true body have a state where their wills are both separate and unified. This is also related to the Go-3 family's mythical creature state. Unlike other mythical creatures who are independent individuals, the Worm of Time's consciousness itself is the collective will of the swarm." "You're right. In that case, I have no reason to refuse." Amon looked deeply at Roland, not denying it, but instead said with interest, "To what extent do you want to seal it?" "For sequence, a mid-sequence should be fine. Being too ordinary would reduce a lot of fun in this world. As for memories," Roland paused here and said with a smile, "of course, they should all be sealed. Actually, I'm quite curious if a blank you would still have this malicious personality." Amon was silent for a few seconds, then smiled and said, I'm also very curious. I'll hold an Amon-wide referendum to vote for that unlucky fellow who will go experience life. Perhaps it might be a fortunate thing for him. Roland retorted, then smiled at Amon and asked, now let's discuss the next question. Do you want a blank you to act directly, or come to our side and act with my student? Both sound very interesting. Amon looked at Roland, thinking of his student, that guy named Jack Jones. Amon actually had a hunch that there was something off about that guy, but he couldn't pinpoint the reason. Yes, precisely because they both sound very interesting, I find it hard to choose. Roland sighed sincerely, saying, think about it, if you act alone, you might end up homeless, struggling to survive, while groping for Beyonder abilities and vaguely exploring the Beyonder domain. If you're unlucky, you might even be caught by the official Beyonders of the church and then enjoy lifelong treatment with food and lodging. And if you act with my student, Roland paused here, a deeper meaning in his smile, and said, that would be too interesting. Every single word, every single sentence, every single detail is correct. Roland's student here doesn't refer to Jack Jones, but to his true student, Klein. Just imagine, fool Mr. taking an amnesiac, blank slate Amon to explore the world, how interesting would that be? Amon glanced at Roland and said with a smile, it seems you already have a preference in your heart. You want me to act with your student. Because it's truly interesting, Roland said enigmatically, then added, of course, to ensure the safety of my student and those around him, if you choose the second option, I will have the sun god act as a witness. The witnessing here naturally refers to using the power of the sun pathway to sign a contract. Although Roland wasn't afraid of Amon causing trouble, this matter involved Klein after all, so Roland decided to be cautious. It seems you care a lot about that student of yours. Amon clearly saw this point. He is my only student, after all. Roland replied with a smile, not denying it, but just looking at Amon and asking, so, what's your choice? I'll certainly choose the second one, because, just as you said, it's very interesting. Amon said with a smile. Although he didn't know exactly what was so interesting about it, Roland's attitude indeed piqued a hint of his curiosity. That's something to look forward to. Roland smiled, opened the menu, and began to order. After ordering, he handed the menu to Danitz next to him. Chapter 191 Danitz is about to faint. Danitz tremblingly took the menu, randomly ordered 2 dishes, and then handed the menu to the next person. After he finished ordering, Roland spoke at the right moment, Danitz, why are you in Byam? Danitz instantly tensed up, almost instinctively replying, the captain ordered a batch of study materials, I'm here to pick them up for her. Wait. Danitz seemed to realize something and asked doubtfully, you know me? Hearing this question, Roland smiled, his laughter carrying a hint of amusement. He then opened a book that had appeared in his hand at some point, turned to a specific page, and said, Flaming Danitz, bounty £3,000, quartermaster of the Golden Dream. Your life so far has only been ordinary, not as exciting as the life dramas of others. Danitz almost subconsciously looked at the book. After seeing the blank page, he was stunned for half a second, then almost instinctively said, there's nothing written on it, what are you looking at? Looking at your destiny. Roland smiled. He ran his hand over the page, then looked at Danitz and said with a smile, do you still think there's nothing written on it now? Danitz looked over and saw numerous blurry images instantly appear on the blank page. Among them, a figure was faintly visible, and that figure greatly resembled him. At the same time, Danitz also saw some familiar buildings, those were the buildings of his hometown. Besides that, Danitz also saw the familiar Golden Dream, and a figure suspected to be his captain. At this moment, no matter how unintelligent Danitz was, he realized that this was probably his destiny. This made Danitz widen his eyes, trying to see the scenes that followed. He saw the figure resembling himself following another blurry figure, bustling about like a servant. He saw himself standing in a world that looked like a sky full of flying snow, seemingly praying for something. He saw himself standing on a ship, with a giant-like figure behind him. Wait, a giant-like figure. Danitz belatedly looked at the other people at the dining table, matching some of the figures in the book with some of the people at the table. However, when Danitz wanted to continue looking, Roland closed the book, made a prohibitory gesture, and said with a smile, let's stop here. Although I've taken precautions, you would still pay a price if you continued to look. Prying into destiny is not a simple matter. This was a lie. What Roland had just displayed was merely an illusion created based on the information he had previously gathered about Danitz, combined with the original work. It wasn't a very clever trick, but it was enough to fool Danitz. After all, Roland did not have the ability to pry into destiny. Danitz immediately withdrew his gaze, then the next second, he cautiously looked at Roland and said, Your Excellency, why did you show me my destiny? It's just interesting. Roland said with a smile, looking at Danitz, your life before was unremarkable, but your life afterward can indeed be called interesting, and most importantly. Roland paused here, then said amidst Danitz's increasingly nervous expression, You are fated with my lord. Danitz's mind was completely blank. He swallowed, subconsciously asking, Your Excellency, which deity do you believe in? Fool. Roland uttered a single word, glanced at Colin Iliad beside him, and the latter immediately understood and began to preach. A few minutes later, Danitz's expression was completely numb. He looked at the terrifying man with a monocle on his left, then at the terrifying big shot with gold-rimmed glasses on his right, then at the row of giants sitting opposite him. Suddenly, he turned to Roland and said, Do I have to believe in fool? Danitz felt like he had entered a nest of evil god believers, and the crucial thing was that none of these people looked like he could defeat them. Of course not, your destiny is decided by yourself. Roland looked at Danitz with a smile and said, I will not force you to change your belief. Hearing this, Danitz looked at Roland, wanting to speak but holding back, then wanting to speak again but holding back. In the end, he didn't ask, When you say my destiny is decided by myself, you don't mean that if I don't change my belief, you'll beat me to death, do you? Of course not. I already said it, this time I just invited you for lunch as an apology. I am not a violent person. Roland naturally saw what Danitz was thinking and said with a smile. Danitz immediately recoiled, but also breathed a sigh of relief. The big shot in front of him said so he really shouldn't be forced to convert to fool, right? Danitz was unwilling to convert not because he was so firm in his original belief, but simply because of a very simple principle. In this era, believing in a deity not among the seven gods was a very dangerous thing, the beginning of a slide into the abyss. The most typical example was the Aurora Order. Many Aurora Order members were quite normal before believing in the true creator, but after believing in the true creator, they became crazier one by one, as if their brains had been eaten by the true creator. And this was even considered relatively good. Examples of people dying or collapsing into monsters after believing in evil gods were everywhere. Although Danitz was very afraid of the person in front of him, he was even more unwilling to casually believe in an unknown mysterious existence. However, he really wasn't forced to convert, so is this really a good person? Danitz cautiously glanced at Roland, guessing in his heart. Roland didn't care either, he hadn't intended to do anything to Danitz anyway. It was just pure mischievousness, just to tease him. Every single word, every single sentence, every single hair, every single internal detail, everything is there. As for whether Danitz would believe in fool later, Roland believed that destiny had its own convergence. It was under these circumstances that Amon the butler brought up the cooked dishes. Roland ate a little and found that the taste was actually quite good, just a bit familiar. Roland raised an eyebrow, took 2 more bites, and after confirming that this sense of familiarity was not an illusion, he looked at Amon and said with a smile, Was your cooking taught by Medici? I watched him cook for decades when I was little, even a fool would learn, Amon did not deny, saying with a smile. Indeed, so have you considered calling Medici, father? Roland stroked his chin and nodded, then suddenly changed the topic. Amon's hand, gripping the knife, paused, and a question mark slowly appeared above his head. Don't look at me like that, a foster father is still a father. Roland said self-righteously. He's, at most, a babysitter, Amon said after a few seconds of silence. How heartless. I thought you'd say he's at most a brother. Actually, brother works too. Combined with the foster father's characteristics, you could call Little Red, father-brother in the future. That way, it's homonymous with bug, and makes people unable to help but laugh. Roland told a cold joke, even specifically using the Chinese word, for this cold joke. Amon, Although he didn't understand, he suddenly felt very cold. Chapter 192 Give you a chance to arrange me. If Klein were here at this moment, he would surely resonate with Amon, because he was also often left cold by the pun-filled jokes told by Jack Jones, even repeatedly wanting to say, "Shut up," but holding back because he didn't want to hurt Jack's feelings. Unfortunately, Klein wasn't here, so in the end, Amon had to bear it all alone. However, Amon was clearly not someone to be trifled with. After a brief silence, he seemed to have caught a keyword and spoke with interest. "Dad bro. It sounds quite similar to the bug my father mentioned, but I think they shouldn't be the same meaning." They are indeed not the same meaning. The former is a neologism combining dad and brother, while the meaning of the latter should not need me to explain, Roland said with a smile. These seem to be two different languages. Amon immediately asked, with a hint of probing. Of course, these are not the same language, but if you expect to get more knowledge about the former from me, forget about it. There's some knowledge I can't just casually share with you. Roland looked at Amon with a smile, then suddenly changed the subject. However, I can teach you your father's language. As a joker with many incarnations, Roland naturally understood multiple languages, and Russian was one of them. Amon was stunned for a moment. He did not understand the language of the ancient sun god's hometown. At most, he could only say a few words. Therefore, what Roland proposed indeed held a certain allure for Amon. But Amon did not rush to agree. He simply raised his hand, pinched the monocle on his face, and said, "Then what must I pay?" He did not think he could get an advantage from Roland. Does the sun god have a habit of writing diaries? Roland did not answer Amon's question but asked with interest. Amon was stunned when he heard this. Then, after roughly a second of recollection, he shook his head and said, "Father does not have a habit of writing diaries." Tisk, I didn't expect the sun god, with his thick eyebrows and big eyes, to actually be a proper person. Roland let out a disappointed tisk, then suddenly raised his hand and snapped his fingers, shielding the others in the room, before looking at Amon and smilingly said, "What I want is very simple. Amon, you should have incarnations all over the world, right?" Amon nodded upon hearing this. Although the actions of Luo Dewang and others a few days ago caused him to lose many characteristics, most of Amon's incarnations had not been recalled and were still spread across the North and South continent. It's just that there were fewer powerful incarnations. What I want is very simple. You just need to help me spread these stories within the range of your incarnation's influence. Roland smiled and took out a small booklet from his embrace, pushing it to Amon. Amon took the booklet. After opening it, he found that it contained several classic short stories, somewhat like the mysterious legends circulated among the populace. The content of the stories was basically about a protagonist encountering danger and injustice, then meeting a mysterious man named Lucifer, who gives them a prophecy. After experiencing various twists and turns, they fight against the source of the danger and achieve victory. What was noteworthy was that in these stories, Lucifer's image was not entirely positive. In fact, in most stories, Lucifer's existence was like a mischievous bystander. He was not compassionate, and his help to the protagonist was merely to better observe the development of events. It must be said, this was very consistent with Amon's impression of Lucifer. These are templates, you can fill them with different content based on the different customs of various regions. Roland said with a smile. He unhurriedly picked up his black tea, took a sip, and then looked at Amon, saying, "How about it? It's a great deal, isn't it? You can learn your father's language from me, and you also get a chance to arrange me." This was not a sudden idea from Roland. In fact, after advancing to Sequence 6 Incarnation, in order to make Lucifer's incarnation materialize as soon as possible, Roland had a series of plans in mind since his advancement. Saving City of Silver to gain City of Silver's faith was one, providing strength to the reformists to continue their speeches was another, and taking the wide net, big catch approach, widely promoting Lucifer's stories was also one. The former could cultivate high-quality fanatics, while the latter relied on quantity, focusing on the idea that as long as enough people knew, some would eventually believe. It was just that Roland hadn't thought about which scapegoat to trick into doing this before, but now he suddenly realized that Amon was the most suitable workhorse. As for whether Amon would cause trouble, Roland was not worried. Although an incarnation transforming from illusory to real required enough people to believe in his existence, appearing as if the incarnation itself was composed of people's cognition, the people's cognition would not, in turn, affect the incarnation. Misplaced cognition would at most only lead to ineffective cognition or weakened belief. With City of Silver and the reformists both being okay, even if the wide net, big catch approach truly failed, Roland would at most spend a bit more time promoting the incarnation, but Amon would have to pay the price for his actions. It's truly you. You're asking for my help, but it sounds like I'm the one benefiting. Amon raised his hand, pinched the monocle on his face, and said with a sigh. He looked at Roland and said, I probably understand why Medici and the others are willing to work for you. I'm just used to win-win situations. After all, there's a huge difference between getting people to willingly work for you and forcing them to. Roland showed a gentle and brilliant smile. If it can be win-win, why not? I can't refute that. Amon chuckled, then nodded and said, I can help you spread these stories, but I'm very curious, what are you planning to do with this? If it's for believers, this is probably not a good way to gain faith. Although not only faith can generate anchor points, enough fear is also feasible. Merely knowing and understanding usually cannot generate anchor points, otherwise, there would be no battle of faiths. Not a single mistake, one head, one hair, one inside, one content, one by one. Guess. Roland did not answer, just looked at him with a smile. All right, it seems like it's something I can't know. Amon shrugged his shoulders discerningly, not asking any more questions. Roland also stopped bothering him. He picked up his black tea and took a sip, his movements suddenly pausing. What's wrong? Amon looked over, with curiosity mixed with scrutiny. Nothing, I just felt that since the matter was discussed, it's time to remove the shielding. Roland shook his head, snapped his fingers with a snap, and removed the shielding on the others. He saw the people of City of Silver diligently eating their meals. Although Danitz was distracted, he was also trying to eat, and Roland immediately nodded with satisfaction. Then Roland also lowered his head and started eating, but at the same time, he shifted most of his attention to the incarnation, Jack Jones. Chapter 193 Azek and the Artificial Death God. Backland. So, these past few days, you took on a protection commission, only to discover that the person you were protecting was a bad influence, learning spirit dances and corpse reanimation from a teacher at a young age. You initially thought that teacher was a corpse collector, but after investigating, you found out he was just an utterly incompetent ordinary person. Roland, in his Jack persona, smiled as he summarized what Klein had just briefly explained. Then, he looked at the feather and copper whistle on the table and asked, are these what you gained from the other party? Klein nodded and said, I suspect these things might be related to the numinous episcopate's so-called artificial death. That makes a lot of sense. Roland nodded. Having read the original work, he naturally knew what these were. He just suddenly pulled out a newspaper from under the coffee table, pointed at the headline, and asked with a hint of curiosity, however, compared to your small discovery while being a bodyguard, I'm actually more curious about what other unexpected things you encountered. The headline of the newspaper's front page was strikingly, Death of a Fraudster, is the mysterious organization Tarot Club striking again? It was a very sensational headline. Roland only discovered this explosive news in the morning paper today after returning home in his, Jack Jones, persona. This made Roland recall a forgotten existence, the fraudster Lannerhaus, one of the culprits of the Tingen incident, a scoundrel who deserved to die. Roland had truly forgotten about this guy before, as he was just cannon fodder with little presence. In the original work, Lannerhaus was used by the half-mad True Creator as a vessel for a divine descent ritual. To escape this fate, he utilized the Nighthawk's power. After depleting the True Creator's divinity within him, he decisively fled and then encountered Mr. Fool, who was ambushing him nearby, and was executed. But now, the True Creator clearly no longer needed Lannerhaus as a vessel for divine descent. Although Klein was also investigating him, he had never found any clues. So, how did this rotten person unluckily encounter Klein? Klein's expression became a bit stiff upon hearing this, clearly recalling some things. He sighed and said somewhat helplessly, before I went to investigate that teacher, I unexpectedly encountered Lannerhaus, the fraudster I mentioned to you before. He seemed to have just escaped from there, and he had some strange changes on him. giving me a feeling similar to facing an evil god's spawn before, just not as powerful. At this point, Klein's expression also showed some lingering fear. He glanced at the black glove on his hand before continuing. Fortunately, I had creeping hunger and also brought a sun charm with me, otherwise I really wouldn't have been Lannerhaus's opponent. However, precisely because of this, the commotion was a bit too big. I didn't want to deal with official Beyonders, so I scattered a deck of tarot cards before leaving. Although Klein wasn't afraid of dealing with official Beyonders, it was always good to have less trouble. Klein didn't want to be arrested and then see a night watcher come to bail him out, such as Miss Daly or Captain Dunn. If someone from his family came to bail him, it would be even worse. Because, given the situation here, the only one who could openly bail him out was probably Mr. Lucifer. Klein couldn't even imagine what Mr. Lucifer, who already disliked him greatly, would react like if he had to come to the church to bail him out. So, Klein simply left a deck of tarot cards to indicate the tarot club's identity. Although this might not be useful, it was better than doing nothing. Roland understood what was going on as soon as he heard this. Clearly, in this fate altered by him, although Lannerhaus had divinity planted within him by the true creator early on, this was, after all, something that happened before Roland came to this world. However, the true creator no longer used him as a vessel for divine descent. This meant that although Lannerhaus didn't gain excessively powerful strength, he was still stronger than ordinary Beyonders, but not overly so. Then, Lannerhaus might have escaped from the Aurora Order, only to run into Klein, that cunning old fox, and was then killed. Although the process is different, the outcome is still the same, which perfectly aligns with the characteristics of fate convergence. The only difference is that the tarot club's reputation is now greater and better. I feel that after some time, if the tarot club openly recruits, people might even join. Roland muttered to himself, just about to say something, when he saw Ask coming down from the second floor. He immediately said, "Mr. Azik, you're awake. Sorry, my nap lasted a bit too long." Ask rubbed his temples, his gaze then falling on the two items on the table. He suddenly froze for a moment, pursed his lips, and said, "Klein, it seems you encountered a small incident." Klein nodded and briefly explained what had happened to Ask, then said, "Mr. Azik, I suspect these things might be related to you." This wasn't a wild guess, because the numinous episcopate's artificial death was almost certainly connected to Ask's other half of the soul. Thus, these two items were indeed related to Ask. Ask's expression wasn't surprised upon hearing this. He reached out and picked up the two items one by one to examine them. After grasping the copper whistle, he closed his eyes, and a chilling aura suddenly emanated from him. Evidently, compared to Ask in the original work, who had not yet recovered much of his memory and power, the Death Consul Ask, who had now directly faced his past, could employ more methods. After a moment, Ask opened his eyes, his expression slightly complex, and said, "I sensed its existence. That is indeed another me, but unlike me, I didn't perceive any emotions from it. It's simply like a machine without consciousness. Perhaps the death god erased its will." Roland wasn't surprised by this result either. He propped himself up with one hand on the coffee table and asked Ask with a hint of concern, "Mr. Azik, did it affect you?" There was probably some influence. Fortunately, there are too many things separating us, and I have recovered to my current strength. Before a formal encounter, it would be difficult for it to cause me too deep an impact, and vice versa. Ask shook his head, then suddenly revealed a smile and said, "However, with this medium, as another Ask, I seem to be able to exert influence on those who have established a connection with it." Roland's eyes lit up when he heard this, and he said, "Are you referring to those people from the Artificial Death faction?" The internal forces of the numinous episcopate are basically divided into three parts: the Royal faction, the Artificial Death faction, and other insignificant factions. Among them, the strongest is undoubtedly the Royal faction, led by Pale Empress Shah, an unknown descendant of the Death God, possibly also a relative of Ask, possessing a sequence 1 characteristic of the Death God pathway. Next is the Artificial Death faction. The leader of this faction is an angel, Hurtle, who is influenced by artificial death. His loyalty to artificial death is questionable, but he is significantly affected. Finally, those insignificant factions are not worth mentioning. If the first two factions can be subdued, these members of the numinous episcopate will naturally also be within their grasp. Chapter 194 I am the god of death, I have returned, VME 50. Thanks to the Aurora Order's efforts, Roland and the others had already obtained this intelligence from the numinous episcopate a long time ago. However, although they had a plan to reclaim the numinous episcopate, they hadn't been able to act against it yet because Mr. Azek's strength hadn't fully recovered, and Roland and the others had been busy fighting Amon, initiating reforms, and saving the City of Silver these past few days. Now, hearing that Mr. Azek could influence the Artificial Death faction through the Artificial Death, Roland was naturally pleased. While a direct attack was possible, if they could first cause internal division and reclaim a portion of the people, it would naturally make subsequent actions much easier. It should be. The strongest existence among them seems to be a Sequence 2 angel, and I can sense that his condition is very poor. Mr. Azek nodded, then thought of something and added, however, he can probably only influence them slightly, directly controlling them is definitely impossible. You've found a bug, it's probably because you and your other half-soul are of the same origin, which might have caused the power of the uniqueness to misjudge. Roland pinched his chin and suddenly said, then, Mr. Azek, can you issue a divine oracle? Yes, but they might not listen, Mr. Azek nodded. It doesn't matter, we don't need them to listen. Roland blinked, revealing a smile, and said, some divine oracles achieve their effect the moment they are issued. For example, Mr. Azek showed a curious expression. Klein was also curious about what Jack intended to do. I am the death, I have returned. VME 50 to make you a death console. Cough, just kidding. Roland instinctively made a joke, then gave a dry laugh, cleared his throat, and said, I am the death, I have returned. I shall absolve the past and redeem you. First commandment, thou shalt not offer living sacrifices. Roland recited 10 commandments in one breath before picking up his coffee and taking a large gulp. He said, that's roughly the format. If you're not satisfied with the content, Mr. Azek, you can change it as you wish, and then mass send this message to the Artificial Death faction members. The Evernight Goddess, after taking over the Artificial Death's identity, didn't dare to send messages indiscriminately to maintain stability within the numinous episcopate, fearing that if it was discovered that someone else was behind it, it would provoke resistance from the numinous episcopate. Roland didn't have this concern. Regardless of whether the numinous episcopate's high-ranking members acknowledged it, Mr. Azek was the most legitimate heir to the death. The reaction of the Hells General upon seeing Mr. Azek indicated that at least the middle and lower ranks of the numinous episcopate had some understanding and recognition of the death console's existence. This was not surprising. After all, the numinous episcopate was originally an organization founded by the remnants of the Byron royal family and the remaining members of the Death Church. For all these years, whether sincerely or insincerely, they had maintained their faith in the death. And when mentioning the death, it was impossible to ignore Mr. Azek, the death's most prominent descendant. Although those who knew the truth understood that the death merely used Mr. Azek as a convenient tool and a vessel for resurrection, in the eyes of those unaware of the truth, Mr. Azek's existence was no different from that of a crown prince. Moreover, Roland was well aware that the numinous episcopate was not a monolithic entity, and he imagined that certain individuals would be very willing to give Mr. Azek a push. For them, Mr. Azek's ascendancy also meant opportunity. Mr. Azek showed a thoughtful expression upon hearing this. Klein, however, seemed to understand something and said, are you trying to reshape everyone's perception of the artificial death? And at the same time, constrain those in the artificial death faction? Strictly speaking, it's to constrain everyone in the numinous episcopate. A secret known by more than 3 people is no longer a secret. After mass sending the message, everyone in the numinous episcopate will know that the death has returned, Roland said with a smile. Of course they can choose not to listen, but someone will listen, won't they? Not many people know what the artificial death truly is. And once division arises, chaos will follow. At the same time, this can help us pre-screen a group of numinous episcopate members who can still be saved. This will save us a lot of trouble when we act later. It was easy to beat the numinous episcopate, but after beating them, distinguishing which members of the numinous episcopate were recyclable waste and which were non-recyclable waste would obviously take some effort. Roland was naturally happy to pre-screen them. These were all useful assets he could employ in the future. What? The numinous episcopate belongs to Mr. Azek. What a joke. Given Mr. Azek's character and their relationship, if Roland wanted to use the numinous episcopate's power, could Mr. Azek refuse? This was also why Roland was so invested in the numinous episcopate's affairs. The Aurora Order was merely an ally, while Mr. Azek's side was considered his own people. There was a difference in closeness between the two. Roland could completely trust Mr. Azek, but he couldn't completely trust the true creator's side. Moreover, I'm also very curious about what kind of impact believers' perceptions will have on a special existence like the artificial death, Roland said, a look of interest appearing on his face. Anchoring points were good things, but they also carried potent venom. The reason why the gods no longer appeared in human form was because they discovered that when they did, the perceptions of their believers would inversely affect the deities themselves. And this point might be even more pronounced in the artificial death. Its birth was inherently closely related to the artificial death faction's operations. Although it was Mr. Azek's other half-soul, it probably had little self-awareness due to something Salinger, that old geezer, had done. In a sense, the artificial death was very similar to the hidden sage, both could be considered uniquenesses that had gained sentience. So, in this situation, if the believer's perception of the artificial death were reshaped, could it interfere with the artificial death state to some extent? Roland felt it was worth experimenting. There was nothing to lose if it failed, and if it succeeded, it might make it much easier for Mr. Azek to merge with his other half-soul later on. Mr. Azek clearly understood Roland's intention. He looked at Roland with gentle eyes, then nodded and said, I think this might be feasible. Everyone present was a person of action, so after further discussing the details, that very night, Mr. Azek took over the artificial death's identity and sent false messages to the members of the artificial death faction. South Continent, a certain mausoleum. Each word, each line, each sentence, each piece of content was carefully examined. After the divine oracle played in his ear, Hurtle's expression remained slightly dazed. He had never expected to receive a divine oracle from the artificial death one day, with the content being that the death had returned and intended to reshape the religious rules. Was this false? Hurtle's first reaction was suspicion, but the divine oracle indeed came from an existence closely related to him, and he did not perceive the aura of the night or any other existence within it. Was this real? Hurtle frowned. He was very certain that the artificial death had not been very active recently, so how could it suddenly grow to the point where it could issue such a divine oracle? What happened? Chapter 195 Who is the sun god's favorite child? Hurtle felt that some things were getting out of control, which made him inevitably anxious, but he didn't know how to bring things back under his control. After all, this involved the uniqueness, and even as an angel, he was powerless and weak in the face of the death uniqueness. Hurtle could only carefully recall the oracle he had just heard, remembering the blurry figure in the oracle and trying to discern who it was. Suddenly, Hurtle paused, connecting the figure in the oracle with someone he had once been incredibly familiar with. Lord Azek, Death Executor. Hurtle's heart pounded violently. In his understanding, if the Evernight goddess, the god of war, and other entities had not grasped the death uniqueness, then among the remaining candidates, besides the true return of death, there seemed to be only one other candidate who could possibly influence the death uniqueness. That was the former death consul of the Balaam Empire, Lord Azek, Death Executor, Your Majesty, the Underworld Emperor's most favored descendant. Hurtle felt a dryness in his throat. If the Evernight goddess or other entities had grasped the uniqueness, he would inevitably choose to resist, even if he was no match. This was the loyalty he, as a former High Priest of Death, should possess. But if it was Lord Azek, Death Executor, could all of this be Your Majesty, the Underworld Emperor's arrangement? Hurtle never believed that Your Majesty, the Underworld Emperor would fall so easily and be unable to revive. His creation of artificial death was actually an attempt to awaken death through this method, although the result was a bit off. In short, if all of this was Your Majesty, the Underworld Emperor's arrangement, then a faint light flickered in Hurtle's eyes as he fell into deep thought. Just then, a presence approached outside the mausoleum, followed by a voice speaking from outside. Lord Hurtle, I just received an oracle. I already know. I also received an oracle. Hurtle interrupted the other party. He had already made up his mind and said, publish the oracle. We must let everyone in the numinous episcopate know that our Lord has returned. Let those in the royal faction know that we are not heretics. Regardless of whether this matter was a subtle arrangement by Death or Lord Azek, Death Executor's own initiative, it was an opportunity for the numinous episcopate and for the artificial Death faction. The former goes without saying. Even the latter meant that Lord Azek, Death Executor, might have grasped the Death uniqueness and become an King of Angels, which was completely acceptable to Hurtle. After all, Ask was far more legitimate to him than Pale Empress Shaw. To put it bluntly, if Lord Azek, Death Executor, had not gone missing back then, there would have been no possibility for Shia, a royal bloodline with thin ties, to ascend. Everyone would have long since enthroned Lord Azek, Death Executor, as the new pope. Unfortunately, times have changed, and many people's faith is no longer pure. Even if Lord Azek, Death Executor, appeared, many might still continue to support Shia. But this premise was that Lord Azek, Death Executor, was still the Death Consul. If Lord Azek, Death Executor, had grasped the Death uniqueness, Hurtle's heart beat even faster at this thought. The numinous episcopate had been suppressed for so many years, which had long made Hurtle realize the importance of strength. And an entity who had grasped the uniqueness, in an era where deities could not easily descend, meant immense security. Moreover, if Lord Azek, Death Executor, returned, there would inevitably be divisions within the royal faction, and that would be their faction's chance to rise. It could be said that, whether out of faith or self-interest, this oracle was an opportunity for Hurtle. So he continued, since God has already given the oracle, we naturally should obey it. While the entire numinous episcopate was stirred up by Ask's mass-sent false messages, on the other side, Roland, disguised as Lucifer, had already finished touring Generous City with the City of Silver people after seeing Danitz off, and had conveniently handed the City of Silver people over to an Amon clone to look after. If you encounter difficulties, you can pray to our Lord, but remember, our Lord advocates the principle of equivalent exchange, everything has a price. Roland smiled as he bid farewell to the City of Silver people. Taking them to Generous City for a day was mainly because Roland himself wanted to have fun, but now that he had enough, he naturally wouldn't continue to be a free nanny. After all, Roland was truly a lazy dog. Yes, we will keep His Highness's teachings in mind. Colin Iliad respectfully replied on behalf of the City of Silver people. Roland then looked at the Amon clone and smiled, I won't say much to you. Anyway, you should understand the consequences of making mistakes. I know what I should do. Believe me, I am more rational than you think. The Amon clone replied with a smile. Roland was noncommittal. He then looked at Amon's main body and said, let's go, little crow, let's return to the forsaken land of the gods. Next, I'm going to Moon City with your father. Do you want to come? I have no reason to refuse. Amon's main body raised a hand and pinched the monocle on his face, replying. Roland smiled at this, not surprised. So the two returned to the forsaken land of the gods. As soon as they entered, they saw Fate Angel Ouroboros already waiting not far away. This was naturally the result of Roland's prior notification. Long time no see, Ouroboros. Roland smiled at Ouroboros. I haven't waited long. Ouroboros shook his head and replied earnestly. Every single content is perfect. He paused, then added, as long as I can see the Lord, I can wait as long as needed. Your awareness. As expected, you and the Sun God have a two-way father-son bond. Amon has already lost. Roland said with a sigh, taking the opportunity to diss a certain Amon. Upon hearing this, Amon's hand gripping the monocle tightened slightly. He looked at Ouroboros and suddenly sneered, HMPH. From that sneer, I sensed jealousy, indignation, and even envy, little crow. As expected, you also think there's a father-son bond between Ouroboros and the Sun God. Roland naturally wouldn't miss Amon's reaction, or rather, he was intentionally fanning the flames from the start. So Roland then looked at Ouroboros and said, Great Serpent, do you want the Sun God to be your father? Ouroboros paused at this, then actually began to think seriously. After a few seconds, he said, I want to. He spoke plainly, but Amon's gaze grew increasingly unfriendly. Although he firmly believed that only he was his father's child and that any angel of fate was merely dreaming, what child would like to have their father stolen? Amon certainly didn't like it. So he sneered, looking at Ouroboros and saying, What right do you have to consider him your father, you who acknowledge a fake? Ouroboros paused, not disappointed, but rather frowned and retorted, The Lord is not a fake, he is just in a bad state. Chapter 196. Are you the Lord of Mysteries? The Lord in Ouroboros's mouth naturally referred to the true creator. Hey! Amon scoffed, looking as if he couldn't be bothered to say more to Ouroboros. Ouroboros, however, still frowned. He suddenly thought of something and said, if you don't acknowledge the creator, why do you stay in the forsaken land of the gods? Do I need your permission to stay wherever I want? Amon glanced at Ouroboros. The creator has always protected you, Ouroboros said seriously, looking at Amon. I didn't ask him. Hiss. Before Amon could finish speaking, a bolt of lightning suddenly struck, hitting Amon directly on the head. Not only that, another bolt of lightning immediately followed. This time, Amon reacted faster, his figure flickering to appear in another location, but the lightning didn't let him go. One after another, it targeted Amon, striking him no matter how he dodged. Clearly, a certain old father who had been peeking was fed up with his mischievous child. This incident tells us not to be greedy and want both. If you want protection but don't acknowledge your father, aren't you just asking for a beating? Even the most doting father has a temper. Roland, who had been watching the show, finally spoke at this moment. Ouroboros showed a thoughtful expression upon hearing this and said, so I can't want the creator to be the creator and also want the creator to be a father. Roland blinked, not adding fuel to the fire, but instead said sincerely, that depends on the sun god's thoughts. He had previously added fuel to the fire to sting Amon's heart. After all, why not sting him if it cost nothing? Oh, Ouroboros responded, showing a thoughtful expression, and finally said, if I can't have the creator be both the creator and a father, I want the creator to continue being the creator. Roland was not surprised by this answer. He merely glanced at Amon, whose expression seemed somewhat eased yet also more displeased, and didn't continue the topic. He simply smiled and said, Ouroboros, I'm tired and plan to sleep. I'll leave the travel in safety during my sleep to you. You should know our destination, right? He specifically notified Fate Angel Ouroboros to come over not to sting Amon's heart, but to ensure safety during sleep and to allow for continuous travel. After all, having the sun god spend precious summoning time on travel was a bit extravagant. These preparatory tasks could be completed with the help of others. For example, Fate Angel Ouroboros, who was incredibly familiar with the forsaken land of the gods. I know. I will protect you and travel well, Ouroboros nodded, saying seriously. So Roland handed the medium for the alternate space to Ouroboros and went to sleep in the nearest alternate space, closing the door of the alternate space to prevent Amon from sneaking in and causing trouble while he slept. When Roland woke up again, it was already the afternoon of the next day. Good afternoon, Ouroboros. Roland left the alternate space and greeted Ouroboros, only to find that they seemed to have arrived near the ceiling wall of the western continent. Not far away was a solidified grayish-white mist, boundless like a giant wall dividing the world in two, making it impossible to imagine what the other side of the mist was like. Tisk, wanting to seal the western continent to force others to support the emergence of the Lord of the Mysteries to achieve resurrection, and the result. How is Celestial Worthy not suffering from his own actions, ha ha ha. Thinking of a certain, dead mystery, who had, in every sense, dug his own grave, Roland couldn't help but laugh gleefully. Then he raised his hand and pulled at the air, and a familiar figure appeared with it. The ancient sun god opened his eyes in the future once more. His gaze first swept over the familiar Roland, Ouroboros, and Amon, then landed on the gray mist a few hundred meters away. The grayish-white mist had no physical form, yet it was a substantial barrier. Before it was lifted by the Lord of the Mysteries, it would prevent anyone from entering or leaving the western continent, and even the ancient sun god, who was half a creator, was helpless against it. The ancient sun god gazed at the wall, made of gray mist and said a few seconds later, compared to my era, the power of the seal has weakened a lot. Perhaps it's because Celestial Worthy is finally almost completely dead. Although that itself is a false proposition. Roland chuckled. He then walked towards the wall, made of gray mist. When he was close enough, Roland raised his hand and pressed it against the wall. The previously calm grayish-white mist began to boil at this moment. The entire wall started to tremble violently, seemingly about to break apart at any second, revealing the western continent within. Even the sun god was stunned when he saw this scene, feeling a rare sense of nervousness in his heart. Could Roland open the seal of the Western continent? Not yet. Roland frowned and withdrew his hand a few seconds later. He had suddenly thought that the Lord of the Mysteries himself was suspected to have a certain connection with the existence of Nyarlathotep, so he wondered if he, as Little Naya, could trick the seal with the power of the Nia shard. The result was that he could trick it, but the shard power he could currently mobilize was not enough to open it. Perhaps I can try again after I advance to an angel. Roland estimated the lacking power gap and came to a conclusion. However, since Nyarlathotep's power does indeed share similarities with the Lord of Mysteries to some extent, why did Saphira Castle not react? Roland thought of Saphira Castle, which had been completely normal when he first ascended it, and then of the unusually quiet Nia shard at the time. He couldn't help but fall into thought for a moment. Every word, every sentence, every paragraph, every piece of content, checked one by one. Could it be that a reaction has already occurred, but I just haven't noticed it? Roland pondered in his heart but still couldn't figure out the reaction. However, he wasn't too concerned about it and simply stopped thinking about it. The ancient sun god naturally didn't know what Roland was thinking. He just looked at the unopened seal, feeling a bit lost for a moment. Amon pushed his monocle, a flicker of thought in his eyes. Ouroboros, meanwhile, watched the gray mist, which had returned to its calm state, then looked at Roland, and suddenly asked, "Roland, are you the Lord of the Mysteries?" At these words, the scene fell silent for a few seconds. The ancient sun god looked at Ouroboros with a hint of helplessness. He knew that given Ouroboros' personality, asking this question was likely out of genuine curiosity. But the crucial point was that some questions were not suitable to be asked too directly. Regarding Roland's identity, whether it was the ancient sun god, the true creator, or perhaps other beings who knew of Roland's miraculous existence, they probably all had some suspicions: a special outer god, an existence similar to celestial worthier the creator, or even a true transmigrator. They had speculated many possibilities, but no one had ever directly asked. Everyone tacitly chose not to investigate Roland's origins. After all, no one could be sure what would happen if that window paper was broken. Perhaps nothing would happen, or perhaps, it could lead to an accident. Chapter 197 Tianzun should call me father. Thinking of this, the ancient sun god looked at Roland with worry and inquiry. To be honest, Roland hadn't expected Ouroboros to ask that, which only goes to show that natural airheads are, in a sense, truly a bane to clever people. However, Roland didn't mind. He just smiled, looked at Ouroboros, and said, "I am not the Lord of the Mysteries." But I'm not entirely unrelated to him either. At this point, Roland paused, then a mischievous thought suddenly struck him, and he said with a smile, "In a sense, Celestial Venerable should call me father." No problem there. The image of the Lord of the Mysteries referenced Nyarlathotep, so in a way, it was indeed a form of father. As soon as these words were spoken, the scene fell silent once more. They couldn't be blamed. Roland's words were simply too astonishing. And more crucially, the ancient sun god could tell that Roland didn't seem to be lying. "But, are you the original creator?" Ouroboros asked the question that was on the ancient sun god's mind. "That's not it," Roland smiled and shook his head. As Ouroboros was about to press further, he gently placed his index finger on his lips, making a shushing gesture, and said, "All right, that's enough secrets for now. Continuing this topic would be dangerous. Some existences can bring danger just by being known. I imagine you understand this principle better than I do." Oh. Ouroboros nodded, half understanding, and said, "I understand." The ancient sun god lowered his gaze, concealing the thoughts in his eyes. Amon pinched the monocle on his face and suddenly spoke, "The results of the Amon-wide referendum are out." "Oh, which unlucky fellow is it?" Roland immediately looked over with keen interest. Amon's main body unceremoniously pulled an Amon clone dressed like a scholar from the air beside him and said with a smile, "It's him." Protest. The scholar Amon was clearly very dissatisfied with this result and shouted loudly, "I protest." The voting was rigged. The main body openly blew a black whistle. "This is unfair. I demand a re-vote. Protest invalid." Amon's main body revealed a ruthless smile and said, "There was no rigging in this vote. 1225, you should understand why you were chosen." In the past 621 years, you once stole the language function of number 009, forcing him to become mute, played a prank on number 996, changing his clothes into a lady's dress. Amon's main body unhurriedly recounted the scholar Amon's mischievous deeds. Good heavens, you are the Amon of Amons, the mischievous child of mischievous children, the lord of pranks. Roland listened with relish, then couldn't help but retort, and the number 1225, in a sense, is too hellish. December 25th, for others, was Christmas, but for a certain Sioux, it was quite hellish. He is the most mischievous of my clones. I think it's necessary for him to experience the life of an ordinary person and learn how to be a good person. Amon's main body looked at Roland, like a demonic parent ruthlessly sending his child to a certain institution. Don't worry, I will definitely let him experience the life of an ordinary person properly. Roland smiled as he looked at the scholar Amon, as if he had found a fun toy. So what are you planning to do? The ancient sun god, who had been listening until now, couldn't help but ask. Mr. Sun God, it's like this. Roland immediately began to explain to the ancient sun god about Amon's plan to experience ordinary life, finally saying, so, to ensure the safety of my student and those around him, I would like to ask Mr. Sun God to help act as a witness. The ancient sun god listened, was silent for a few seconds, then nodded and said, all right, I'd be happy to help. The ancient sun god then looked at Amon with a hint of relief and said, Amon, you truly are a good child. It seemed the ancient sun god was very pleased that Amon chose to live as an ordinary person to better understand humanity. Amon probably hadn't expected to be praised by the ancient sun god in this way. His expression was uncharacteristically awkward, but from the slight curl of his lips, it was clear he was in a good mood. Ouroboros then spoke up, perhaps I can help with this matter. Roland immediately looked at him, curiously asking, how do you plan to help? I can reset the Amon clone's mind to when he was a child, Ouroboros said seriously. Oh, wow. Roland raised an eyebrow. He looked at Amon, then at Ouroboros, and sighed with some hesitation, although a young Amon would be very interesting, I don't want to raise a child. Ouroboros tilted his head, thought seriously for a few seconds, then added, after the reset, Amon's mind can return to a normal state within a few days. Upon hearing this, Roland's eyes lit up, and he stroked his chin, saying, then that might be worth a try. Roland certainly wouldn't agree to raising a child for a long time, but trying something new and experiencing it for a few days was no problem. I also miss Amon when he was a child. The ancient sun god's gaze softened, as if he recalled something. Is no one going to ask for my opinion? The scholar Amon spoke in despair. Amon's main body glanced at him and said with a smile, I don't think so. Main body, whose side are you on? We are all Amons. The scholar Amon's voice was shrill. Not a single mistake, one by one, everything in order. I'm on the side of interesting things. Amon's main body pushed the monocle on his face and said, and this is very interesting. Black-hearted main body. Even tricking your own clones. I will resist the main body's tyranny, the world belongs to. The scholar Amon's voice abruptly cut off. It turned out he had been knocked unconscious by Amon's main body. Sorry, it seems a bit too noisy, Amon's main body said with a smile. Ancient sun god, Ouroboros, Roland, it's truly you, so ruthless even towards your own clones. Roland sighed at Amon's behavior, then poked the ancient sun god beside him and said, regarding your attitudes towards clones, you truly are father and son. The ancient sun god's smile instantly became a bit helpless. Roland then clapped his hands and said, since 1225 Amon has already been knocked out, let's seal his memory now. Mr. Sun God, I'll have to trouble you with this. There was no one more suitable to do this than the Sun God, who possessed the authority of spectator, especially since he was Amon's father. Thus, the poor scholar Amon, while unconscious, had his memory sealed and his mind reset, even his body temporarily reverted to infancy, held by Ouroboros. The ancient sun god's expression suddenly became somewhat dazed watching this scene, thinking of when Amon was first born. It was like this then too, a tiny child held by Ouroboros, and at that time, the ancient sun god watched this newly born little life, uncharacteristically at a loss. This was his child. At that time, the ancient sun god, who had originally only intended to strip away the marauder characteristic, suddenly realized he had become a father. Chapter 198 Sun God, I have fallen. Now, thousands of years have passed, and his child has grown up, but in order to regain humanity, he decided to restart his life. And he, once again, personally brought about the birth of his child. So, it's true that fate is a wonderful thing, isn't it? Roland said with a smile, as if he had seen what the ancient sun god was thinking. It is indeed wonderful. The ancient sun god came back to his senses, smiled, and nodded. Ouroboros, who was beside them, first looked down at the young Amon in his arms, then at the ancient sun god, and finally at Amon's main body, saying, "Are they talking about you?" Amon, who had been paying attention to the ancient sun god the whole time and probably guessed what he was thinking, raised his hand and pinched the monocle on his face, though the movement was slightly forceful. Although reason told Amon that his father was looking at his avatar, emotionally, Amon still couldn't help but feel a hint of displeasure, or rather, jealousy. Tisk. Amon's main body finally pouted and said nothing more. Just then, there was a stir in the darkness not far away. It seemed someone was approaching. Roland glanced over, probably guessing who the newcomers were. It would be strange if the Moon City people, who had been monitoring the gray fog wall, didn't notice such a big commotion from the gray fog seal. So, Roland looked at the ancient sun god and said, "It seems the people from Moon City have arrived. Do you want to meet them?" The ancient sun god pursed his lips, this time not refusing directly like he did when facing City of Silver last time. Roland continued to smile and said, "Go meet them. Unlike City of Silver, since you gave the Moon City people a mission, you should bring that mission to an end." I understand. The ancient sun god nodded, sighing as he looked in the direction of Moon City. He should bring the Moon City people's mission to an end, so they can better embrace a new life. Nim was the high priest of Moon City. Like Colin Iliad, Nim also led Moon City in holding on amidst the darkness, but in some sense, the Moon City people were not as fortunate as City of Silver. They didn't have sufficiently special sealed artifacts that could make black-faced grass, edible by humans, grow on Moon City's land. But fortunately, Moon City originally had the special mission of monitoring the Western Continent's seal, so this city-state was given relatively complete potion formulas for various pathways at that time, which allowed them to survive by eating monsters, and they have persisted until now. However, just as City of Silver was nearing its limit, the people of Moon City were also struggling to hold on. This even had nothing to do with their will being firm or not, but because after generations of accumulated toxins and madness, the citizens of Moon City had developed severe deformities, and if this continued, it would be hard to say what the next generation would become. Therefore, Nim was once extremely anxious, fearing that Moon City might perish under such circumstances, and even made many attempts for this, but there had been no obvious results, unable to find a truly effective method to save Moon City. Until today, Nim suddenly noticed movement in the wall made of gray mist that the Creator had once commanded them to monitor. This shocked Nim, but also filled him with excitement and fear. He almost immediately led people towards the gray fog wall. By the time they arrived, the commotion from the gray fog wall had subsided for a long time, but Nim almost instinctively held his breath. Because in front of the gray fog wall were two figures, two completely unfamiliar humans, whose bodies even looked completely free of deformities. Nim hadn't seen completely normal people for far too long. In Moon City now, normal humans only existed in ancient texts, which made Nim even forget what normal people looked like. This was not even the most crucial point. The most crucial point was that Moon City, as a city-state that was once directly assigned by the Creator to monitor the Western Continent's seal, did not lack records about the Creator within the city-state, and among these records, a very small portion depicted the Creator's appearance. That description perfectly matched one of the people in front of him. Nim's lips trembled, and a guess surged in his heart, but he dared not confirm it. Alas! Nim heard a sigh. The existence suspected to be the Creator walked in front of him, and a gentle voice then sounded in his ear. For these 3,722 years, you have worked hard. Your mission is over. Nim finally couldn't hold back his tears. Dealing with Moon City's affairs was not difficult for the ancient sun god. He purified the toxins in the Moon City citizens' bodies using the power of the sun pathway, treated them using the White Tower to simulate the power of the Earth pathway, casually catalyzed some edible plants, and then manually created a sun for them. Everything was done. After doing all this, the ancient sun god looked at Nim beside him and said, Moon City still believes in me, right? Every single word and content is accurate and complete. Yes, we have never wavered in our faith in our Lord. We have always longed for our Lord's return, Nim said devoutly, with his head bowed. The ancient sun god sighed, but still said, since you still believe in me, then please do one last thing for me. He turned his head to look at Roland and said, this is Lucifer. From now on, you no longer need to believe in me, you will become his followers. Nim immediately looked up in shock. Due to his extreme surprise, he almost blurted out, why? Lord, have we done something wrong? Is that why you want to abandon us? Not abandoned. The ancient sun god shook his head, looking at Nim with a serious yet sighing expression, and said, I have already fallen. Nim's expression froze in a daze. The moment darkness enveloped this land, I had already fallen. The person before you now is merely a remnant of an old day. The ancient sun god spoke this cruel truth, looking at Nim and saying, it was Lucifer who awakened me. He hopes to help you all. He is a very good existence. I am very relieved to entrust you to him. This was the truth. The sun god chose to hand over City of Silver and Moon City to Roland not only to increase Roland's anchor points but also because he had already fallen, and the true creator was, after all, semi-mad and trapped in the forsaken land of the gods, making him unsuitable to continue as the object of faith for these two city-states. Lord, the ups and downs of life were nothing more than this. Nim was so sad for a moment that he could only call out to the sun god, unable to utter any other words. He truly believed in the sun god, even though he had never seen this deity before today. But Nim was, after all, the high priest of Moon City. Although he believed in the sun god, he cared more about the safety of Moon City's citizens. So, after his grief, Nim lowered his head and said, your will is our will. Chapter 199 Little Amon's sky collapses. After settling matters in Moon City and bringing the Moon City advance team out of the forsaken land of the gods, Roland found the City of Silver people who were building their new home, introduced the Moon City advance team to them, and handed them over to an Amon clone for care. Then Roland took the Amon cub home. I understand the logic, but old guy, why did you bring a child back after a trip out? Jack Jones pinched his chin with one hand, gazing at the child in his body's arms with an inquisitive and gossipy look, saying, could this be your illegitimate child from outside? Or a new student you plan to take in? Or you Batman? Should I now express my dissatisfaction, fight you, and then angrily run away from home? It is well known that Batman is skilled at picking up children, and he never informs the children already at home before picking up new ones, which often leads to family disputes. Klein also curiously observed the child Mr. Lucifer was holding, and looked at the monocle on his face with some confusion. Such a young child already wearing glasses. Apparently, Klein hadn't thought of a certain little crow for a while. A child this young shouldn't be able to eat normal food yet. Do you have formula? If not, I remember there's milk in the kitchen. Ask assessed the child's age, his expression showing a hint of worry. Medici, who had returned to the villa after dealing with matters concerning the revolution, raised an eyebrow, his expression slightly subtle as he looked at the child. He suddenly spoke, little crow, are you planning to re-experience your childhood? As soon as he said this, the room fell silent for a few seconds. Everyone else realized something, and their expressions became strange. Roland, wearing Mr. Lucifer's vest, smiled and said, this is Amon. He decided to experience the life of an ordinary person to gain humanity, so we reset him to childhood, sealed his memories, and for a period of time, he will live with us. Everyone. What explosive news. Ha 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 ha. You finally got what was coming to you, little crow. Medici almost immediately laughed gleefully. Of course, he could tell that this was just an Amon clone, but that still didn't stop him from being happy. Klein's mouth twitched. He looked at the Amon cub, then at Mr. Lucifer, and suddenly thought of the Lucifer diaries he had read. Hiss, is Mr. Lucifer trying to get an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth? Klein gasped, suddenly feeling some sympathy for Amon. After a brief moment of stunned, Ask looked at the Amon cub and, after a moment's thought, asked a crucial question, will he grow up like a normal person? He will grow up, but not quite like a normal person. His current state is 1 year old, and from now on, he will grow 1 year older each day until he transforms into an 18-year-old state. Then he will stop changing, Roland, wearing Mr. Lucifer's vest, explained. Jack Jones reached out and poked the Amon cub's cheek, looking at the unconscious Amon cub, and asked, what about safety? Putting Klein and Amon together, I always feel it's a bit dangerous. You don't have to worry about that. I have already signed a contract with Amon under the notarization of his father, the sun god you are familiar with. He cannot cause trouble, Roland said with a smile. He was naturally putting on this act to reassure everyone. As soon as he said this, everyone in the room let out a sigh of relief, more or less. After all, Amon's notorious reputation was already deeply ingrained in people's hearts. Although he had suffered many losses in front of Mr. Lucifer and acted like a good child because he had something to ask for, it didn't mean that Amon was easy to deal with in front of others. Then does he need to eat like a normal person? Klein asked curiously. He can eat, or not eat. After all, it's just a clone, and eating is not essential for him, Roland explained. Then he looked at Medici, handed the Amon cub over, and said, you have more experience with children, so I'll leave him in your care for now. Medici raised an eyebrow but didn't refuse. He simply took the Amon cub and held him in a very standard way of holding a child, making it clear at a glance that he was very professional. Then Medici freed one hand and fiercely pinched the Amon cub's cheek. It was clear that he pinched very hard, because the Amon cub, who had been unconscious, suddenly started crying. Wah! For a moment, the room was filled with the sound of a baby crying. Klein and the others looked at each other. Ask suddenly walked towards the kitchen, while Medici looked at Amon like this and laughed again, ha ha ha. He really turned into a child, I'm dying of laughter. After laughing, Medici snapped his free hand in front of the Amon cub, instantly conjuring a lifelike small bird out of flames. He dangled the bird in front of the Amon cub's eyes, and it wasn't long before it attracted the Amon cub's attention, making him stop crying. Just then, Ask came out with a bottle of milk, carefully feeding the warm milk to the Amon cub. Is this what a professional looks like? They've all taken care of children, indeed, Jack Jones said with emotion, pinching his chin. Wait, where did the bottle come from? Klein looked at the bottle in Ask's hand in confusion, not knowing where it came from. They hadn't had children before this. This was originally prepared for another little guy, but I didn't expect him not to use it, but Amon did, Roland, wearing Mr. Lucifer's vest, said at this time, answering Klein's question. All in one go. This, of course, refers to Will. Speaking of which, should I really find a time to meet this fake child? Roland started thinking again. The arrival of the Amon cub, though surprising, didn't bring much trouble to the family. Because both Medici and Ask were truly professionals, they had rich experience in taking care of children. In a blink of an eye, little Amon was 3 years old. Under the guidance of a certain enthusiastic red angel, the young little Amon formed his initial self-awareness. His name is Little Amon, he is a member of the Amon tribe, his nickname is Little Crow, and their race is very special. 1 day for them is equivalent to 1 human year, so he can only live for at most another 100 days. After learning this, little Amon felt like his world had collapsed, and he ate 2 fewer bowls of rice at lunchtime. Are we really not going to tell him the truth? Klein glanced at little Amon, who was sulking and eating candy on the sofa, feeling a rare pang of conscience. Why should we tell him that? Isn't this great? Think about it, he originally thought he was going to die, but after 100 days, he's still alive and well. What a huge surprise that is. Roland, wearing Jack's vest, spread his hands, speaking with righteous indignation. Quote. All right. Klein's mouth twitched, and he said nothing more. He then pulled out his pocket watch, glanced at it, and said, I'm going back to my room first. The new round of the Tarot Club was about to begin. Chapter 200 The Hanged Man Decides to Work Harder. Good afternoon, Mr. Fool. Accompanied by Justice Audrey's usual cheerful voice, several figures appeared on the originally empty gray fog, and a new round of the Tarot Club began. Justice Audrey greeted all the members of the Tarot Club as usual, and her gaze couldn't help but fall on little son Derek. Not only her, but other Tarot Club members also subconsciously looked in little son Derek's direction, observing his state. During the last Tarot Club meeting, everyone learned that City of Silver was about to welcome light, and Little Sun would most likely be part of the vanguard team leaving the forsaken land of the gods to come to the northern and southern continents. So now, it can be said that apart from a few individuals involved, other Tarot Club members are very curious about the current situation of City of Silver and whether Little Sun has truly left the forsaken land of the gods. Coincidentally, no member provided a new Russell's diary this time, so the Fool Klein simply announced the start of the free communication session. Mr. Sun, how is City of Silver doing now? Justice Audrey eagerly looked at Little Sun Derek and asked. With her taking the lead, the other Tarot Club members naturally didn't need to ask again, and for a moment, they all waited for Little Sun Derek's answer. Before I left, City of Silver already had its own sun. As soon as he talked about this, Little Sun Derek's face flushed with excitement. He then gestured while describing the previous events to the other members of the Tarot Club, finally saying. Later, His Highness Lucifer led the Chiefess, the Vanguard team members, out of the forsaken land of the gods and brought us to a city called Byam. I had never seen such a city, and there was so much delicious food. Little Sun Derek almost subconsciously shared what he had seen and heard in Byam with the Tarot Club members. After speaking, he remembered something else, raised his hand to touch the back of his head, and said somewhat sheepishly. Sorry, Miss Justice, you clearly asked about City of Silver, and I just kept talking about what happened after we came out. It's all right, I'm very happy to learn about your current lives. Justice Audrey shook her head and couldn't help but say with a smile, I was a bit worried before, but now it seems I was overthinking. Do you have any plans for your next step? Is there anything I can help with? The chief said that our primary goal now is to adapt to life in the outside world, and then prepare for the subsequent arrival of City of Silver's people. He plans to take us to investigate some Beander circles in the outside world first, and then see if we can sell some Beander materials for money. Little Sun Derek had no intention of hiding anything and spilled everything he knew like pouring beans. Perhaps in this regard, I can offer some help. Hanged Man Alger, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. I have some connections in Byam, and I'm relatively familiar with the 5 Cs. If you have any Beander materials that need to be sold, I can help. Thank you, Mr. Hanged Man. Little Sun Derek thanked him earnestly, then said, however, I can't decide this matter. I'm afraid I'll have to tell the chief first. Hanged Man Alger was not surprised by this. He merely said, I happen to have something to do in Byam recently. If you don't mind, perhaps we can talk in person. If it had been before, Hanged Man Alger would not have so rashly made a request for a meeting. He had always been cautious. But now, a corner of the iceberg of Mr. Fool's power in the real world had been completely revealed to Hanged Man Alger. It was a power far beyond what Hanged Man Alger had previously imagined, causing him to tremble while also realizing that this was an opportunity, and he had to do something. So, after learning that the people of City of Silver were now in Byam, Hanged Man Alger made a decision in his heart. The 5 Cs happened to be where he usually operated, and here he had various inherent advantages, allowing him to naturally come into contact with the people of City of Silver. Afterward, whether it was utilizing the uniqueness of City of Silver to help them while securing reasonable benefits for himself, or deepening his ties with City of Silver and establishing a deeper connection with Mr. Fool's power, both were good choices for Hanged Man Alger. As for the risk, because City of Silver now also believes in Fool, and Hanged Man Alger brought up this matter in the Tarot Club, under the witness of Mr. Fool, the risk of this matter is actually very low. Mr. Hanged Man, you're coming to see me. That's great. Hearing Hanged Man's words, Little Sun Derek immediately became happy. He truly had a high regard for Hanged Man, thinking he was a good person who had always helped him. So, he quickly nodded and said, I will tell the chief about this. The chief will definitely be very happy for Mr. Hanged Man to come as a guest. It's a pity I can't go to Byam. Justice Audrey showed a slightly regretful expression. As a noble young lady who hadn't officially come of age, although she had some freedom to travel, it was limited to within Backland. Outside Backland, she had to report to her family. Let alone going to Byam, even going to other cities in Loan would require her parents' consent. However, Justice Audrey thought of something, looked at Little Sun Derek, and said, if you are relatively short on money right now, I can lend it to you. I can probably get £5,000, or directly convert it into corresponding supplies. Do you need anything? Although this will make me relatively tight for a while, it will be fine after the coming of age ceremony, which is only 2 months away, Justice Audrey added in her heart. She truly wanted to help those poor people in City of Silver. You could say her kindness had limitations, but the kindness itself was not fake. Thank you, Miss Justice, but we probably don't need it yet. If we really run out of money, we will borrow from you. Little son Derek thanked her earnestly. Is Amon treating you well? Roland asked at this time. He hadn't paid much attention to City of Silver these past few days and wasn't really sure if Amon was doing a good job, only that the people there were safe. Little son Derek was stunned when he heard Roland's words, then he realized that as His Highness Lucifer's student, Mr. Emperor probably did know of Amon's existence, and he quickly said, Mr. Amon is very good to us. He arranged new living quarters for us, supported us in rebuilding more suitable houses, taught us the language and writing of the outside world. Little son Derek spoke like pouring beans. From his description, Roland could confirm that Amon had indeed done a very good job. He had handled food, clothing, housing, and transportation very well, and he hadn't forgotten to teach the people of City of Silver the necessary knowledge of the outside world's writing and history. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.